Chapter 12 Art of Flora. Li Yingfeng took Xiaoguo along with her as she guarded his door. Seeing Zhuo Mo, Li Yingfeng visibly released a breath. Xiaoguo's apple face revealed an bashful expression. Zhuo Mo was slightly surprised. Why did these two come? His mouth smiled and said, Shiji has the time to come to my humble abode today. Such a surprise. Please come in. Finishing, he swung out his sleeve. Underneath, he sent out a spell and the door to the yard soundlessly opened. Li Yingfeng didn't decline, frankly responding, coming without an invitation, we've disturbed you. Xiaoguo tightly followed behind Li Yingfeng but her little face was still timid. Zhuo Mo muttered inside, Ji doesn't have much interest in silly little girls. Entering the yard, Li Yingfeng saw the lush ling grains in the yard and her eyes lit up. She couldn't help complimenting, Xixiang is really skilled at farming. This ling grains growth is the envy of others and a bountiful harvest is just around the corner. Shiji is too complimentary. Zhuo Mo casually responded. Inside, he started to ponder the reason that Li Yingfeng had come today. Towards this Shiji that he hadn't had many interactions with in the past, he felt admiration. Regardless of anything else, just her cultivation of Lianqi 9th level, it was enough to be top dog of the heap in the outer sect disciples. And her frank and honest conduct was very become to Zhuo Mo's temper. The three people sat down under a tree next to the pond. The water in the pond ripples. Occasionally, one could see a few fish darting by. When Zhuo Mo first moved into the yard, the pond was dry to the bottom. All the water presently in the pond had been slowly accumulated from him practicing, little art of cloud and rain. He remembered it very clearly because when the pond became full, his little art of cloud and rain coincidentally reached the 3rd level. As to those fish, they were captured randomly when he passed by some mountain streams. Li Yingfeng took the initiative to speak of her purpose in coming today. One is to thank Shidi. The method that Shidi said, we have used and to great effect. One really needs mastery in a field. Such a troublesome problem, it really needed someone like Shidi who specialized in farming to solve. Yes. It was really effective. Everyone is so happy. Xiaoguo hurried to agree. But when she saw Zhuo Mo's face turn towards her, she instantly fell silent, her body retreating towards Li Yingfeng. Zhuo Mo took back his gaze and shook his head, Shiji is too polite. We are from the same sect. There's no need to put such a minor matter on the mind. Li Yingfeng smiled and responded, Shidi's words are extremely good. In the future, if Shidi meets a hard problem, feel free to come find me. Wherever Shiji can help, I wouldn't decline. Many thanks Shiji. Zhuo Mo unconcernedly brushed it off. Past experiences had told him that normally, these kinds of words can't be taken seriously. Li Yingfeng gazed with burning eyes at Zhuo Mo, continuing seriously, coming today, it's to ask for Shidi's help on another matter. The meat finally came. Zhuo Mo said expressionlessly, what matter? In reality, he couldn't make expressions. Shidi's methods were extremely effective. Li Yingfeng gave a grimace, but in our crowd of sisters, only one knows the art of earth energy. Shidi, you might not know, because of the weeds previously, there was only a pitiful amount of ling grass that was produced. But the amount of ling grass that the animals need is only increasing. Originally, I had planned to go to Dongfu to buy some to fill the gap, but who knew that the price of ling grass and grains are flying up? Hearing this, Zhuo Mo's mind jumped. Price increases in ling grains, for him, it was definitely good news. Not taking into account the 50 mu of ling fields that he rented from the sect, just the 5 mu of ling grains in his yard, the harvest would be significant. He really profited this year. He gleefully calculated in his heart, completely not registering what Li Yingfeng was saying. Li Yingfeng noticed Zhuo Mo's inattentiveness and couldn't help thinking about the rumors she found out about Zhuo Mo. The shock to her that came from such a strong shitty who jumped out of nowhere was enormous. Once Suemo left, she went around for information. She didn't only know that Suemo had a natural zombie face, and the third level of little art of cloud and rain, etc., but she even managed to have a general understanding of his usual habits and conduct. Deciding not to keep being polite, she threw out the bomb, coming today, it's to ask Shitty to weed for us. This is 10 pieces of second-grade jingsha. It is the goodwill of all of us. Shitty, please take it. Once again, it was a small pouch that appeared on her hand. As expected, Suemo shook and instantly focused. 10 pieces of second-grade jingsha. His saliva nearly slipped out. When he had sold 300 caddies of ling grains last time, he had just received 30 pieces of second-grade jingsha. Suemo hesitated, stating, I'm not skilled at art of earth energy, so I'm afraid I can't help much. Li Yingfeng assumed that Suemo was being polite. If he wasn't an expert, why would he have thought of using art of earth energy to get rid of the weeds? This time, she had prepared well. She didn't panic, smiled and said, other than these 10 pieces of second-grade jingsha, we have also prepared 5 pieces of second-grade jingsha for Shitty to recover ling energy in hopes that the supply of ling grass could recover in the fastest time. Suemo's brain exploded, completely dizzy due to being hit by Li Yingfeng's jingsha. Jingsha was the most important resource in each sect. Other than being used to purchase things, its other important use was for recovering ling energy. The density of ling energy in ling veins could not compare at all to what was in jingsha. In some large sects, those core disciples were completely built up through jingsha. Their job each day was to suck ling energy out of jingsha and increase their cultivation. Suemo had never tried to extract ling energy from jingsha. He was poor. How could he bear it? The enemy was too strong. He instantly surrendered, promising, inside Shiji has an order, as a Shitty, I'll naturally rush through water and tread on fire, and will not decline. Li Yingfeng smiled. The tactic was successful. She put down the little pouch on the table, looking at Suemo and asking, when will Shitty go? Suemo put the little cloth pouch into his bosom in a flash, his tone solemn as he responded, the situation is so serious. Naturally, the faster the better. Xiaoguo's mouth twisted. Following between the two people, Suemo continued to recall the major points of art of earth energy. In the last few days, most of his attention had been on art of aged gold and art of flora. After roughly practicing art of earth energy, he didn't spend much time on it. He could have never thought that this art of earth energy would directly connect to 15 pieces of second-grade jingsha. Why did he practice spells? Wasn't it for jingsha? He was upset inside. If he knew earlier, he would have practiced more. Very quickly, they reached the eastern peak. The female disciples all silently stood at the side, no one speaking. Even though Suemo didn't care about them at all, but the completely different treatment he received this time around made him feel good inside. The ling fields infested with weeds are about 450 mu. There's about 250 mu that are much more serious. Li Yingfeng introduced. Suemo nearly tripped. 250 mu. This number scared him. Art of earth energy was different than little art of cloud and rain. Its effective range was much smaller, about 1 mu or so. Also, he tried already. With his first level of art of earth energy, he needed to repeat more than 3 times in order to effectively stop the growth of the damned weeds. That was to say, at the least, he needed to perform art of earth energy 750 times. The answer made his eyes flip and he nearly fainted. This number, it was enough to work him to death. He had thought he got a cushy job. He didn't think it was really a drudgery one. Falling from heaven into hell, the strong contrast nearly made Suemo cry. Suemo looked at the ling fields under his feet filled with weeds and wanted to cry. There were almost only weeds left in these fields. It was hard to even find a trace of the ling grass. Such strong weeds, with his just introductory level of Art of Earth Energy, he might have to do it 7 or 8 times to be effective. At this time, his mind was clever and a spark flashed though. He suddenly thought of a beautiful idea. Since these ling fields were almost completely weeds, they could erase everything and plant ling grasses again. The kind of dominant spell that, Art of Flora, wasn't it just perfect for the situation? Art of Flora, other than extracting the vitality and essence of the weeds, it wouldn't even let go of the seeds that were in the soil. What it extracted was the essence of plants, not ling energy, so it wouldn't even harm the ling fields. The more he thought, the more excited he became, so he told his thoughts to Li Yingfeng. When Li Yingfeng found out that Sui Mo also knew Art of Flora, she was slightly shocked. Inside, she thought that this Sui Mo Shidi wasn't an ordinary person. Increasingly feeling that Sui Mo wasn't ordinary, Li Yingfeng naturally didn't have any objections. Inside, she felt that it was very likely to succeed this time. This time, she was working against major pressure. 15 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was almost all the Jingshi she had. Quickly going through it again in his head and checking that no problems should occur, Sui Mo decided to do it. The 2 fists were slightly open, held in front of his chest. The fingertips glowed slightly. Taking a deep breath, the 10 fingers moved. The others only felt threads of light weaving between Sui Mo's 10 fingers. It was like a drawing, dazzling everyone's eyes. Only shock was left on everyone's face. Only now did they realize the uniqueness of this zombie-like Shixiang. It was a dance of light at the fingertips. That dried up and thin hands, it seemed to have a strange power, and attracted everyone's gaze. The diagram that had been drawn was already extremely complicated, but the dancing fingers didn't stop. Even Li Yingfeng's face couldn't help change. Such complicated finger motions. What spell would require such complicated moves? She didn't know that it was due to the complicated nature of the finger movements that, Art of Flora, was the most difficult among the 5 spells and the number of people who learned it the least. Countless green threads flew up from the ling fields and wriggled between Sui Mo's palms. Unlike the restraint that happened usually, Sui Mo had no hesitations now. The fear and trepidation that was present completely disappeared. The 10 fingers flipped and danced and he pushed forward with all his ling energy. Gradually, a very strange feeling birthed. It seemed that something was slightly throbbing at his heart. Unconsciously, the rate of movement of his 10 fingers became faster. The throbbing at his heart became even stronger. Everything in the surroundings seemed to fall away. Empty and clear, like a void, he looked on silently. The subtle connections between the dancing 10 fingers, the rhythm as the ling energy changed, it went from barely perceptible to the surface. It was as though a paper window was poked open and his vision suddenly became clear. The rawness of Sui Mo's finger motions instantly disappeared. The 10 fingers were like they had been dipped in water, abnormally smooth, flowing like the water. Of all the female disciples, Li Yingfeng's cultivation was the highest and her eyes the most knowledgeable. She was the first to detect the peculiarity. If it was said that she had just been admiring the complicated nature of Sui Mo's finger movements, she was feeling completely different now. The finger movements were still beautiful, yet it didn't have that feeling of profoundness, but a kind of strange cadence. Xiaoguo's eyes widened. On the little apple face, an intoxicated adorable expression came on. Threads of green energy floated up from the ling grasses and weeds in the field. The space between Sui Mo's 10 fingers was like the center of a whirlpool, energetically sucking in the green energy. More and more of the green energy accumulated on Sui Mo's hands. Very quickly, a green and glistening plant essence bead appeared at his fingertip. The ling fields were a patch of dry yellow, not a hint of green to be found. As a gust of wind blew across, it fell down like dust. In the blink of an eye, a vital and living ling field had become dead ground. Everyone looked dumbstruck. Their gazes as they looked at Suemo were like looking at a ghost. Li Yingfeng was incomparably shocked inside. If it was said that the grandiose finger motions made her entranced, then the shocking result in front of her would only make her uncontrollably feel terror. Was he really Lianqi? She suddenly found it somewhat suspicious. Chapter 13 Success. Leaving the void state, Suemo mused upon it for a long time. Had that been a moment of enlightenment? He thought with joy and some regret. As expected, when he cast Art of Flora, the following few times, the state of emptiness didn't appear like they did the first time. But his finger movements clearly went up a step and became much more flowing. Especially the cooperation between the Ling energy and the finger movements. It was as though he found the trick to it. When his fingers moved, the Ling energy followed and changed, the two tightly connected. The grandiose finger movements, the terrifying results, it made the female disciples that were still apprehensive docilely close their mouths. Swa hadn't thought the effects would be this strong neither. The dominance of Art of Flora surpassed his predictions. He couldn't help but become alert inside. When he cast Art of Flora, in the future, he needed to be careful. The following matters were much easier. They only needed to plow the Ling fields again before planting the Ling grasses. The method the female disciples used to plant Ling grass broadened his vision. He saw a female disciple take out a bamboo container from her waist, pluck out the cork, and a gold earthworm climbed out. She incanted the spell and the gold earthworm burrowed into the Ling fields. In a short while, the soil rolled and twisted. After 20 minutes when it stopped, the Ling fields were completely overturned. What was most amazing was that not one bit of soil had splashed out of the Ling fields. Suemo couldn't help but be interested. What's this? It's very convenient. Li Yingfeng was both educated and kind. She said knowingly, we call them mud-turning earthworms. It isn't anything high-grade, just used to overturn the fields. But the results are pretty good. Afterwards, we'll give some to Shidi. It would be a helper in growing Ling grains. Suemo was joyous, many thanks Shiji. In the newly turned Ling fields, the female disciples spread out the Ling grass seeds. Growing Ling grasses didn't have as many concerns as growing Ling grains. They only had to spread it densely. After finishing seeding, Suemo saw a female disciple preparing to cast Little Art of Cloud and Rain, and volunteered, does it need rain? I'll do it. Return the favor. It wasn't good to take another person's things for free. Li Yingfeng was overjoyed. I heard that Shidi's Little Art of Cloud and Rain reached the 3rd level. Today, I get to have a look. Little Art of Cloud and Rain was Suemo's most familiar spell. He almost didn't need any preparation. Just started the spell and the cloud formed, appearing above the Ling fields. Silver threads gradually entered the Ling fields, the air full of vitality. Everyone felt their minds become refreshed. There were very big differences between the 4th level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, and the 3rd level. Just when the rain stopped, a rainbow appeared above the Ling fields. Just as everyone was complimenting, one female disciple shouted as she pointed at the Ling fields, heavens! Look, it sprouted. At some time, a patch of thin and light green sprouts appeared in the Ling fields. Suemo took out the plant essence bead and cast Art of Flora again. It instantly dissolved into countless bunches of green thread and merged into the Ling fields. The light green spouts in the Ling fields instantly became darker, their growth delightful. Shidi is just as rumored. Li Yingfeng complimented sincerely. This unknown Shidi seemed to have endless methods, and always could bring her unexpected surprises. And she found that no matter which technique that Suemo used, there were major differences with what she had heard. What was he concealing? Li Yingfeng thought of this question again. Art of Flora, combined with Little Art of Cloud and Rain, the effect was outstanding, the effectiveness increasing. Li Yingfeng didn't care what methods Mo used, she only hoped to produce ling grasses quickly. To increase speed, for a continuous length of time, other than going to Cold Mist Valley to make rain once a day, Mo spent all his time at the eastern peak. This was the first time he received the luxurious treatment of using Jingshi to recover ling energy. The body was like a vessel. To contain more ling energy, it needed continually increasingly large containers. The simplest way to increase the size of the container was to change the body. Continuously using ling energy, the ling energy would continuously strengthen the channels and so more ling energy could be stored. The purity and density of the ling energy inside the Jingshi exceeded the ling energy drifting in the air. It was much easier to absorb and the effect it had on the channels were clearer. The next few days, Mo continuously repeated, Art of Flora, and, Little Art of Cloud and Rain. The amount of work that was required for more than 400 mu of ling fields were finished by him alone. The female disciples finally saw the craziness and absorbed nature of him at work. Casing a spell, holding a Jingshi in meditation, then standing to cast a spell until all ling energy was used, then meditation. Even as they looked on from the side, they felt exhausted. But Mo repeated the cycle and didn't feel any dullness. Of course Mo wouldn't find it dull. Such luxurious treatment, he had never thought of it even in his dreams. Such a good opportunity, if he didn't use it, was he dumb? He didn't spare any of his ling energy. Each time, he would wring the ling energy out of his body completely. Then he would take the Jingshi and suck fanatically. In these few days, he had gained much. Even if there wasn't those 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi, he definitely would have agreed. His channels, which had never extracted ling energy in such a manner, were like dry ground meeting a surge of rain. In these short few days, the amount of ling energy in his body increased by almost 10%, his channels becoming stronger as well. Other than that, as he repeated, Art of Flora, over and over, his degree of proficiency increased linearly. There were signs he was nearing the second level. Looking at the green ling fields, all the fields had been replanted with ling grasses. That also mean the job was finished. His heart was full of reluctance. At what time would he meet such a good thing like this? He sighed deeply in his heart. 5 days, he used up 5 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. No wonder Mo was still wishing to continue. But luckily, 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was enough to satisfy the yearning in his heart. The stone in Li Yingfeng's heart landed. Even though the price was high, she had managed to solve a troublesome problem. And she had met a strong shitty. She was very satisfied. Work and relax, that was the right way. Returning to the yard, Mo's wallet was bulging and his mood relaxed. But his studies each day, he never stopped. Even though the efficiency of meditation was far from being able to compare with using Jingshi, but Mo still persisted. The ling energy in the Jingshi might be pure and easy to absorb, but it was slightly strong. It was slower to meditate and absorb ling energy, but it was very gentle. In the long run, it was easy to leave behind hidden dangers by relying too much of Jingshi. Those sects with thick bases and foundations had many methods to solve the dangers, but to Mo, those were far away. Of course, the most important thing was Mo didn't have that many Jingshi to squander. Other than that, right now, he was focusing on Art of Aged Gold and Art of Flora. Art of Aged Gold was at the second level, and it wasn't far before Art of Flora would also break. If both of these could reach the third level, and adding in the fourth level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, it was enough for him to qualify as a ling plant farmer. By that time, the Jingshi will roll in. In the next few days, his mood was great. Each day, he lightheartedly ran over to Cold Mist Valley each day to make rain. The ling herbs in the medicine fields were growing well, the effect of the fourth level of Little Art of Cloud and Rain, clear. The ling herbs seemed to have more vitality than before. Each time when he stated to make rain, the ling herbs in the fields would neatly follow and sway as though they were rejoicing. Zhuo Mo's mood became cheerful whenever he saw these ling herbs dancing. To this job that was forced upon him, his unwillingness had decreased. The medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley were third-grade ling fields. The intelligence in these ling herbs greatly surpassed normal plants. The misfortunes of the past swept away. His life became bright once again. Just as usual, he made a round of inspections before leaving. After making sure that nothing happened, he then left Cold Mist Valley. Not long after he left Cold Mist Valley, he suddenly heard the sound of people talking in the front. Old Black is pretty misfortunate. The ling grains are infected with this strange disease. He probably won't get even one grain this year. Next year, he might not even get to plant the ling grains. He has a family of the old and young, his days will become hard. Oh, it's fate. I'm just worried if this strange disease will spread. If we get infected, that would be terrible. So true. Heavens protect. I'm still depending on this year's harvest to exchange for a sword scripture. Me too. Strange disease. Zhuo Mo's heart jumped. Planting ling grains, what people were most afraid of were those unnameable strange diseases. Once it occurred, it basically was a loss for the entire year. These 2 years, Zhuo Mo had personally seen several Shixiang, due to bad luck, become unable to even pay the rent for the ling fields to the sect and were thrown out of the sect. A while ago when he made rain for Old Black, his ling grains were growing well, so why did they suddenly become infected with a strange disease? Zhuo Mo felt it a bit strange. If one had to say who had it the hardest in the sect, it was probably Old Black. He had a family. His son supposedly had some innate talent and had been admitted into a small sword sect. The tribute he needed to give each year to the sect wasn't a small amount. Adding on the different material and jingsher needed for cultivation, the spending was enormous. Old Black had a cultivation of Lianqi 5th level. He rented a full 200 mu of ling fields. All his time was spent on growing ling grains. These 10 years, his cultivation hadn't increased one bit. But even so, the jingsher he earned was just barely enough. This year, Old Black was especially hardworking. It was rumored that his son was at the gate of Lianqi 7th level. For his son to push through the big jump of the 7th level, he needed a lot of jingsher. To give to the sect for the sect elders to give some extra attention, it was an unwritten rule. Other than that, Old Black had put hopes on another method. Places without ling veins, the amount of ling energy in the air was extremely low. If he relied on those ling energy to change into the ling energy inside his body, it was extremely slow. Xiuzhe would have the wealth usually used 2 kinds of methods. One was using ling grains for a long period. There weren't high levels of ling energy in the ling grains, but the effect was gentle and easily absorbed. The other method was directly extracting ling energy from the jingsher. This was also the fasted method. Additionally, using jingsher was especially effective at making breakthroughs. Old Black thought to use this method for his son to break through the barrier to the 7th level. Zhuo Mo decided to take a look. And if it really would spread, then his own 50 mu of ling fields would also be affected. There were many people surrounding the ling fields at the base of the mountain. Zhuo Mo found Old Black in the crowd with one glance. That black face was now so pale there wasn't a hint of blood, the eyes empty and hopeless. And the ling fields that Zhuo Mo recently made rain for was enough to scare him. The green ling grains were now almost completely withered. The leaves and primary stem full of a kind of black energy. Anyone who saw the situation would be certain that these ling grains would certainly die. Many Shixiang were gathered at the edge of the ling field. They formed groups and discussed in low voices, all their voices full of worry. Guo Shixiang's here. Guo Shixiang's here. Someone cheered from the crowd. A light came into Old Black's devastated eyes and he suddenly crawled up from the ground. Guo Lu Shixiang was the person who had the deepest knowledge of art of aged gold. A number of years ago, he had reached the second level. The recent news was that he was going to soon enter the third level. Usually, when some strange illness appeared in the Ling grains, everyone would recommend Guo Lu Shixiang. And he didn't disappoint. He saved the Ling grains that everyone thought would die multiple times. Guo Lu Shixiang was barefoot and wearing shorts, his face full of wrinkles like an old farmer. When he saw the swaths of withered Ling fields, his face couldn't help but change before recovering. The change was extremely subtle, but Sua Mo coincidentally caught it. When he had seen the withered Ling fields, he had already had a bad feeling. When he saw the change in expression of Guo Lu Shixiang, the ominous feeling inside became even stronger. As he improved on art of aged gold, he understood much more. If it was normal pests, the withered leaves wouldn't have been slightly black. This black was like dead ash, and made Sua Mo's heart beat frantically. Old Black almost rushed in front of Guo Lu Shixiang and shouted heart-wrenchingly, "Shixiang, save me." Seeing Old Black's despairing expression, a flush came upon Guo Lu's face and he gravely said, "As much as I'm capable." He walked into the Ling fields. Everyone's eyes gathered on his body, not a sound of discussion made. Everyone stared fixedly at Guo Shixiang that stepped into the Ling fields. Guo Lu Shixiang's expression was grave. He walked in front of a withered Ling grain and squatted down, attentively examining every part of the Ling grain. He also ripped down the withered and slightly black leaves, putting it to the nose for a smell. His inspection was extremely fine. He almost walked around the entire Ling field and took more than an hour. The suspicious expression on his face became even heavier, as though he had encountered something impossible. He shook his head, his expression still suspicious, and his hand landed on a withered Ling grain. Sua Mo, who also knew art of aged gold, suddenly became alert. He knew the most crucial time had come. Chapter 14 Strange disease. Hand touching the Ling grain, a hint of gold suddenly floated onto Guo Lu Shixiang's face. Just this was enough to make Sua Mo feel admiration. Guo Lu Shixiang's comprehension of art of aged gold was much deeper than him. Even though he was at the second level, but in actual usage and level of comprehension, he was much weaker than Guo Lu Shixiang. Yet something unexpected happened. Guo Lu Shixiang's expression changed and he spat out a mouthful of blood, falling to the ground. The disciples spectating instantly paled and rushed forward heading for Guo Lu Shixiang. They only saw that Guo Lu Shixiang's face was as white as paper, barely breathing and unconscious. Some Shixiang who were on good relations with Guo Lu Shixiang hurriedly held him up and ran up the mountain. Old Black stayed still in his original place and then started to wail, the sound so mournful listeners also became sad. The crowd gradually dissipated, each person's face filled with worry. Sua Mo moved his feet, walking into the Ling fields. Nearing a stalk of Ling grain, he closely examined it. He didn't dare to touch it with his hand. The scene just now, it really made him extremely afraid of these Ling grains. A fishy odor entered his nose. Sua Mo couldn't help but frown. In his 2 years of farming, he had never smelt something like this. Inside, he really wanted to find out what was really inside this Ling grains. He suddenly thought about the first time he encountered pests. That brutal and dangerous aura was still fresh on his mind. It was only when he had used art of aged gold on his 5 mu of Ling grains that first time that he encountered a similar situation. When Guo Lu Shixiang suddenly spat blood, the first thought in his head was it that inside these Ling grains, there were similar yet stronger presences? But the lesson of Guo Lu Shixiang told him to not rashly try. Looking at Old Black, he sighed inside. A problem that even Guo Shixiang couldn't solve, he had the desire but not the strength. Even when he got back to his small yard, that scene was still playing in his mind. The seriousness of the problem increased dramatically due to Guo Lu Shixiang throwing up blood. It was certain that the sect would respond. But the only one knowledgeable in the sect about farming, fourth Shigu Shifeng Rong, had left to wander half a year ago and still hadn't recovered. Hao Min Shiji, who was responsible for the medicine fields, had left with Luo Li Shixiang. Hao Min Shiji was going to be out of luck, but Sua Mo didn't have much joy. He had a feeling that the strange disease would spread. When he entered the Ling fields, he had detected that the withering of the Ling grains were clearly different. From that, it could be seen that there was a progress in which the Ling grains in the field were infected. The situation was exactly what he had predicted. In the following days, another 2 Shixiang's Ling grains became infected with this kind of strange disease. The higher-ups of the sect still hadn't set out any measures. Guo Lu Shixiang was still unconscious. A layer of dark clouds covered Wukong Sword sect. There were still about 2 months before the time to harvest the Ling grains. Everyone could only pray that the Ling grains in their own fields would escape and endure to harvest. However, prayers didn't do anything. This year, the number of outer sect disciples who received not a seed quickly increased to 10 people. While Mo's luck seemed to have been used up. He became one of the 10 people. The 5 mu in the yard was still good, but some withered Ling grains started to appear in the 50 mu he rented from the sect. His heart suddenly became nervous. At no time had he ever thought he would leave the sect. Farming wasn't an easy job, but he still lived well. From when he opened his eyes 2 years ago, he had lived at Wukong Mountain. This was like his home. But if he couldn't completely pay the rent for the Ling fields this year, he would be exiled out of the sect. This was something he could not accept. Even more, if he left the yard, where would he go to find even the smallest section of Ling vein? Nothing was harder to accept than seeing the Ling grains in the fields wither stalk by stalk. Nothing other than being unable to stop the spread made people feel despair. The harsh fishy odor waved off the fields. The rich fields became a pit of mud. The sect was swarming with victims. The number of outer sect disciples that were infected by the strange disease increased to 25 people. The remainder were also in danger. The Ling grains were almost entirely dry. Only at the spot nearest the ground could a hint of green be seen. If they couldn't find a way, when the vitality of this Ling grains were completely gone, it would be too late. Just as Mo was at his wit's end, suddenly a pink little thousand crane appeared in front of his eyes. Damned woman! Making a bother at this time. Mo saw this paper crane and couldn't help starting to swear. He didn't have any intentions of picking the crane, sneering and musing to himself, "Humph, Ge won't pay attention to you, go play by yourself." After the sound landed, the little thousand crane suddenly opened on its own. "Yi, where are you waiting for me?" A sweet and adorable voice wormed into his ears. It was like licking a mouthful of honey, or gently tickled at the heart. A person who was less resolute would have softened to the bones. Mo stared with an open mouth at this pink paper that opened up on its own in front of him. On it was written exactly what the voice said. Automatically unfolding, automatically speaking, automatically finding people. The tiny pink little thousand crane showed so many wonders that let Mo's weak soul received an unprecedented battering. He suddenly had a premonition. He might have provoked big trouble. Fine, it's not good to argue with a woman. Gu won't play with you, he said to himself righteously. Wanting to use beauty to tempt me? Humph. Mo sneered, "You're still tender." Not just a magic voice, but even if it was a peerless naked woman, Ge can still calmly, heart as fixed as pine. In the Ling fields, there was only the sound of Mo's duck-like voice singing, "I was originally a mirror, yet dust fell upon me, yeah." Before his voice stopped, another pink little thousand crane flew in front of him from the sky. The exquisite pink little thousand crane moved like stripping off clothing, the motions elegant as it automatically unfolded. "Ha, Yi, if you don't reply, the next little thousand crane, I'll draw a flame-exploding seal." "Am I afraid?" Mo wasn't scared, Am I one that will lower his head due to power? He suddenly posed, tilting his head and muttering to himself, flame exploding seal, where did I hear it? Before his voice landed, he saw a pink little thousand crane flying over from the corner of his eyes. He scratched his head. It came again. How did the other find him? This was the part that made him the most curious. He had never heard of a 1,000 paper crane having such an ability. Unless it was those people that were really powerful. But the powerful people, who would use something as washed out as little 1,000 cranes. Wait, she said she would draw a flame-exploding seal this time. Zhuomo's pupils widened and he unhesitatingly lifted his feet and started running. Boom! A sound of explosion came from behind him. A strong pressure wave forced Zhuomo into a tumble, eating the dirt. Zhuomo dazed. As a beginner Xiuzha that was only knowledgeable at farming, things like explosions definitely shouldn't appear in his life. Struggling to sit up from the dirt, he looked at the large hole that had been exploded behind him, his expression dazed. From the side, another pink little 1,000 crane flew in front of him and was elegantly unfolded. But in Zhuomo's eyes there wasn't any elegance, but only the grace that was filled with an empress favor. The specialty of an empress favor was that it didn't care whether you were willing or not. Haha, in 10 minutes, I want to draw a flaming explosion chain seal. Zhuomo's mind blanked and he jumped up from the ground like his ass was on fire. He grabbed the pink paper floating in front of him and ran in the direction of his residence. 10 minutes. Damned woman. When the familiar yard appeared in his view, his lungs were burning, his throat smoking. Zhuomo almost cried. Like the wind, he rushed into the yard. Like the wind, he rushed into the room. Like the wind, he found the cinnabar and weasel bristle brush. What do you really want? There wasn't any of the easy and boldness of last time. It was so bitter like a weak woman that had a brute rush into her rooms in the middle of the night. With the fastest speed, he folded the pink paper and with faster speed, he filled it with Ling energy and patted his chest in trepidation as he watched it disappear into the horizon. Zhuomo felt he was really unlucky. Why did he be so idle as to pick up the paper crane? Why did he reply? Thinking about the crowd of paper cranes flying down from the sky and then boom boom boom. With him as the center, within 3 miles, nothing would remain. Zhuomo's head felt numb. A short while later, a pink little 1,000 crane flew in from the window. Ha, I just want to chat with ye. Life, philosophy, how interesting. Zhuomo crisply raised a white flag, I surrender. The other disregarded it. What's ye's dream? Earn Jingshi. Zhuomo helplessly wrote down, full of humiliation. Can Jingshi be earned? In any case, I can't shit it out. Zhuomo was just going to throw the broken pot. Before Zhuomo became numb, he finally understood. The other was only a woman that was raised in deep protection, extremely bored, lonely, unfulfilled, thought of lives as grass yet was abnormally powerful. And it was this, abnormally powerful, that easily slayed any intentions of Zhuomo to rebel. A matter worth celebrating was that this woman had the habit of eating. For the first time, Zhuomo was grateful for this habit that was gradually disappearing from the world. It rescued this poor lamb that he was. Temporarily dispatching the woman, Zhuomo took a breath. From the high nervousness at the beginning to the complete numbness at the end, Zhuomo managed to completely experience the process of a soul being wounded. This even made him not feel any more terror towards the Ling grains that made Guoxixiang throw up blood. The experiences this afternoon made him believe, that in this world, there couldn't be anything more scary than this terrifying woman. He decided to try to rescue his 50 mu of Ling grains. He didn't want to leave this place. Chapter 15 Little Yao. The night came and Wukong Mountain was a piece of quiet. Because it was far from Dongfu, the life inside the mountain was extremely dull. When night arrived, the outer sect disciples would usually gather together to chat and entertain themselves. And the inner sect disciples would spend the majority of time on cultivation. From a certain point of view, the pressure that inner sect disciples had wasn't less than outer sect disciples. They needed to keep cultivating so they could qualify to attend Yao Hunt. Once every 10 years, if in a sword sect, there wasn't anyone who attended Yao Hunt, the sect would quickly disappear. This was common knowledge. This was a trait of sword sections. They frequently would rise very quickly, but at the same time, their fall would be even faster. The number of sword sects with long histories could be counted on the fingers. All of them were enormous entities. These matters weren't related to Zhuemo. He had no connections to Yao Hunt. In the night, he walked along on the mountain path. Under generations of care, the wild beasts on Wukong mountains were extinct, so he didn't need to worry for his safety. From when he opened his eyes until now, the scenes of life flashed through his mind. His eyes became more resolute, his steps faster. The sect didn't treat him especially well. However, he was used to the life here. It was somewhat hard, but it was safe. The only knot in his heart was his origins. That dream that always appeared, this face that never had expression. It seemed to be telling him something. But until now, he didn't have a hint. Other than this knot, he was very satisfied with his present life. Yet he might be quickly facing the fate of being exiled from the sect. Maybe one day, he would leave here. But not right now. And there was also another reason that made him so decisive. It was an impulse moving restlessly in his heart. He didn't understand why, but after the 2 previous encounters, the craving for battle seemed to have been activated in his bones. Zhuemo didn't know if this would count as battle, but in his heart, the kind of confrontation didn't make him scared, but he actually seemed to desire it. With his 8th level of Lianqi, the night was just like day, and he wasn't affected. Very quickly, he reached his 50 mu of Ling fields. The speed of withering was extremely fast. It was more serious than when he had left this afternoon. Another large patch of Ling grains showed signs of withering. Walking to the nearest stalk of Ling grains, smelling the fishy odor, he suddenly thought about the scene of Guo Lu Shixiang choking up blood and fainting and hesitated. But this hesitation flashed before disappearing from his eyes. Replacing it was a burning light. The aged gold energy flashed a dazzling gold in the dark. It was like a ball of fairies. Zhuemo took a deep breath. His right hand holding the aged gold energy, he placed it on the stem of the Ling grain in front of him. Boom! It was as though he was suddenly pulled into another world. Countless black seeds like dandelion seeds floated in the void, forming a black sea. This black sea swayed gently. Each time it moved, it gave out a vast energy. Each of them was small and weak, but the energy that this piece of black sea exuded, even Zhuemo couldn't find the urge to rebel. He blankly faced this large black sea, not knowing what to do. The aged gold energy that was usually roiling and violent retreated behind him for the first time. At the same time in old black's Ling fields, there stood 3 people. Among the 3, one had a square face and a long beard, his expression stern and authoritative. The other was an old man thin like steel, ice in his eyes, his sword essence imposing. The last was a round person, a smile eternally on his face with great cheer. If a disciple was here, they would jump in fright. The authoritative one was the head of the sect, Pei Yuan Ran. The think-like steel one was Xian Yen Shishu. The smiling fat one was Yen Lu. Of the first generation of Wukong sword sect, 3 of the 4 were present. If this was passed out, a large fuss would occur in the sect. Does the 2 shitty recognize what this is? Pei Yuan Ran asked in a deep voice. This time, the strange disease came so suspiciously without any forewarning. And it was so ferocious. In just a few days, almost half of the Ling fields were damaged. This meant that the Ling grain harvest this year would be significantly damaged, the loss more than half. For a small sect like Wukong sword sect, this kind of loss was enough to affect their operations. So when the news reached them, the leader of the sect and the other elders that never asked about the Ling fields quickly came to look. Yet the situation was even worse than they had imagined. All three of them were in a terrible mood. Xin Yen shook his head, never seen it, but it can eat Ling, so it should be Yao, kill. The last word was full of murderous intent, bitingly cold. Second Shixiang is right. Even Yen Lu, the one always agreeable with a smile on his face, had a dark expression, but Yao has never stepped onto Wukong Mountain before. How did this small Yao come to our Wukong Mountain? This matter is fishy. Pei Yuanran mused, a hint of worry in his expression. After 3,000 years ago when the two races of Yaomao retreated, in the thousands of years, nothing has ever been heard about Yaomao appearing in the present territory of the Sword Rivers. But Yao has appeared in our sect, it really is a puzzle. Shixiang shouldn't worry, just kill it. Xin Yen frigidly replied, not just a little Yao that hasn't matured. But even the big Yao, humph, those that died under my sword, there were many. Yen Lu gave a reminiscing expression, smiling and adding, thinking about that year when the three of us hunted Yao. Second Shixiang's ice dragon sword intimidated all the Yaomao, and made them quake. The other two also showed expressions of recall. Let's sort out this little Yao first. Such a good moon, let's go back and boil tea. It would be an experience. Pei Yuanran smiled, suggesting. Yen Lu smiled and clapped, that's good. Second Shixiang, we'll cover for you. Xin Yen didn't decline. The ice in his eyes flashed and he summoned his flying sword. A snowy white crystal sword appeared in the sky. The clean clarity of the body made the moon seem dull. Soaring in the night sky, it intimated. This was Xin Yan's famous, ice dragon sword. Go! A clear shout echoed in the surroundings. The body of the ice dragon sword trembled slightly and turned into a pure white icy dragon. The two eyes flashed viciously. Giving a low bellow, it changed into a flashing light and raced for the Ling fields. When the light was just about to attack the Ling fields, something unexpected happened. A gust of black smoke came out of each stalk of withered Ling grain. Those extremely thin black wisps of smoke grew in the wind. In a few blinks of the eye, the Ling fields were covered in a layer of inky black smoke. Even the finger of a hand couldn't be seen in front of the eyes. The three of Pei Yuanran were covered in smoke but were not the least bit panicked. But they didn't know that not far away, there was an outer sect disciple that was also covered in the black smoke. Zhua Mo was startled awake by Xin Yan's shout. But at this time, he suddenly found that he couldn't even take his consciousness away. What he could see was still the countless black dandelion seeds flying everywhere. But this clear shout from somewhere disturbed the peace of the sea. The black dandelion seeds started to surge like a large ocean that suddenly had a windstorm. Fury, contempt, helplessness, sorrow. Many different emotions floated into Zhuomo's heart. He was like a puppet, full of countless emotions that didn't belong to him. These emotions were limitless and restless, raging through Zhuomo's consciousness. But Zhuomo's own consciousness was clearer than ever. What was more tragic than even his consciousness being controlled? Something suddenly seemed to have been touched in his heart. An unprecedented loathing and hatred suddenly rose. Damn it! Zhuomo's body was shaking. Every joint in the entire body shaking. The shaking became even stronger, the scene extremely unsettling. In the sea of consciousness, he furiously struggled, furiously shouted. Get out! A furious shout tore out, like the roar of thunder, and echoed in this borderless black sea. And the raging emotions in his heart suddenly disappeared with his shout. He still could feel the different feelings transferring from the Black Sea, but the emotions didn't take over his consciousness. Immediately after, he saw something he would never forget. A pure white sword blow, landing from the sky. Just one sword. The Black Sea he thought was vast and limitless was cleaved in two. He could not comprehend the vastness and strength of this sword. Suemo was shocked still. His own sea of consciousness, at this moment, was frozen by this grand sword. Terror, and instinct, it dominated every corner of his mind. Everything seemed to slow down. After the sword strike that seemed to destroy the heavens, countless small sword essences, like sharks in a pack, chased those black dandelion seeds. Everywhere they passed, nothing was left. The Black Sea gave out the feeling of panic, terror. Suemo smiled. When the Black Sea controlled his emotions, it had infuriated him. The battle ended very quickly. A second blow didn't materialize. This one blow was enough to erase the entire Black Sea. The Ling grains returned to normal, except they were heavily damaged and needed time to recover. The control of his consciousness returned to him and he left the Ling grain. He couldn't help wipe the cold sweat on his forehead. The danger this night totally surpassed his imagination. Thinking about it now, he couldn't help but still be scared. He laid down on the ground, his entire body soft, soaked in sweat. The night wind blew and he shuddered. He walked soullessly back to his own little yard. What were those black dandelion seeds inside the Ling grains? That sword strike that appeared out of nowhere, whose was it? That one strike, the shock it gave him was really too strong. Bone-achingly cold, murderous intent overflowing, the meaning of the sword was branded in his mind. He suddenly understood why so many people would choose to cultivate the sword. To chase after power, wasn't it was the natural tendency of people? Even more, it was such strong, such terrifying power. The 50 mu of Ling grains were finally saved. Even though this year's harvest would dramatically decrease, but he should still have the amount for this year's rent. At this point, he heaved a sigh of relief. Sitting down, he started to inspect his own consciousness. He had never gone through something like his experience tonight. He was very worried this would affect him negatively. As he started his mediation, his face suddenly changed. In his sea of consciousness, there floated one black dandelion seed. It is actually a dragon that doesn't have any horns. An immature dragon. Chapter 16 Sword Essence, Don't Forget. Even if you die, you mustn't forget. The strange yet familiar voice echoed like a nightmare. Just like usual, Suemo was startled awake from his dream. He grimaced as he sat up. Rationally, if he had the same dream this many times, he should be numb against it. But each time he woke up, he would find his body soaked in sweat. Even he felt that it was unimaginable. The stars in the sky were brightly lit, the starlight falling down. Wukong Mountains was peaceful and quiet. That dangerous scene from last night flashed before his eyes. He suddenly remembered that black dandelion seed in his sea of consciousness. He quickly went to inspect. It was still floating in his consciousness. There wasn't any movement. He released a breath. No matter what method he used, it didn't have any effect on this black dandelion seed. He was somewhat worried. From a glance, it could be seen that this black dandelion seed wasn't something good. Now that it suddenly ran into his sea of consciousness, it definitely wasn't a good thing. Should he wait a while and then go take a look at the doctor? He mused inside. Waking up in the middle of the night, he didn't have a hint of drowsiness. After thinking for a while, the matter of the black dandelion seed was thrown to one side. In this situation where he couldn't think of any solutions, excessive worry was superfluous. Limited by his cultivation, his sea of consciousness wasn't large. Other than that black dandelion seed, it was empty. As he kept on thinking, he thought about that sword essence that flew over the heavens. The shock that that sword essence gave him was too large, deeply ingraining itself in his head. He had never learned any sword scriptures, but that didn't mean he didn't understand anything. In the outer sect disciples, there were many that practiced sword scriptures. Because Wukong sword sect was a sword sect. Like Wei Xing Shixiang, he mainly cultivated the sword, and had once been Luo Li Shixiang's sword servant. The so-called sword servant, they were the servants of Sword Xiu. They were responsible for cleaning the battlefield and some supplementary duties. Wei Xing Shixiang had the greatest battle strength in the outer sect disciples, and his battle experience was extremely rich. It was rumored that he had even once killed Sword Xiu who were in the initial stages of Zhuji. But he had seen how Wei Xing Shixiang practicing. The lights flew and it was very pretty, but compared to that sword essence, it was like a colorful paper bird, a poke and it would tear. But the vast sword essence last night that seemed to cleave the heavens, he had never imagined anything like it. Under that sword strike, everything bowed. He was as tiny as an ant. Just at this time, something unexpected occurred. In his sea of consciousness, an icy and pure white sword essence appeared without a warning. Zhuo Mo's body froze, his eyes bulging and his breathing stopped. A beat later, his cold body steadily warmed. His eyes slowly recovered the spirit. He heavily exhaled, shock filling his eyes. Why was it like this? That suddenly appearing sword essence, it was exactly the same as that terrifying sword strike last night. Having no guards against it, that sword strike almost cleaved his sea of consciousness in half. The pure and cold murderous intent contained in the sword strike directly made him stop breathing, all the organs in his body at that moment stopped moving. He still felt trepidation and didn't understand what had happened at all. It wasn't possible. Having the black dandelion seed exist in his consciousness was enough to make him terrified, now there was the addition of a sword essence. No. When he inspected before, he didn't find this sword essence. Leaving his sea of consciousness, he thought back in great detail on how the sword essence had appeared. Then he found, just when the sword essence had appeared, it was exactly when he was in the sea of consciousness facing the black dandelion seed when he remembered the sword essence. A bold idea suddenly appeared in his head. Was it that this sword essence had been released by that black dandelion seed? This freakish idea, once it came out, it couldn't be pushed down. His sea of consciousness turned back into a void. The black dandelion seed floated around alone in the void. Zhuo Mo hesitated. That sword essence was too strong. Just right now, the blow to his body and soul were extreme. But the desire to understand what happened quickly won. He gritted his teeth. Go for it. Facing the black dandelion seed, he thought back to that sword essence. Hiss. A silvery white sword essence flew out. Splat. Zhuo Mo's body froze and he threw up a mouthful of blood. A second later, ha 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 ha. The sound of laughter rang out of the little yard. Zhuo Mo's mouth was smeared with blood, frightening to the eye, yet his face was joyous. It really was that black dandelion seed. The sword essence really was released by it. Having prepared this time, he saw it clearly. Not just that, he also found that this sword essence was completely different than what he had seen last time. Or, more correctly, it was even clearer. And because of it, its undoubted power was exposed. How could Zhuo Mo's fragile spirit endure the blow of such a strong sword essence? So he was wounded and spat blood. But even wounded, Zhuo Mo couldn't help roar with laughter. If he could comprehend this sword essence. Before last night, he didn't have a bit of interest in Sword Xiu. But that pure and icy sword energy planted a seed in his heart. A seed that was interested in strength. But Zhuo Mo quickly came out from his joy. This sword strike was extremely strong, nothing he could bear. His head started to ache. After receiving 2 blows from the stroke strike, his spirit was already wounded. And, thinking about the pain as his body being completely frozen, his consciousness easily being split in half, his face slightly paled. Comprehending this sword essence, there were many benefits. But, at the same time, he had to pay a painful price. The spirit being wounded, it was much harder to heal than other wounds. The pain at his head made him hiss repeatedly. Grabbing the sound tablet beside him, he pushed in Ling energy. Fierce conflict has once again exploded at Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia. The voice inside the sound tablet made Zhuemo pause. The sound tablet was an essential part of his life. He would listen to the sound tablet each night to go to sleep. In this length of time, there was a clear increase in the news about the conflict at Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia. Was it the Yaoma were discontent at being suppressed for so long and was starting to counterattack? He thought humorously, but he quickly threw the question to one side. No matter if it was Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia, or Yaoma, it was 100,000 miles away from him, completely unrelated. He didn't even think the Yaoma would make a ripple. 3,000 years ago, the war between the Xiuzha and Yaoma, it ended in a complete victory for the Xiuzha. If there wasn't a Bloody Sky Metropolis Jia stopping the forward progress of the Xiuzha, it was very likely that the Yaoma would have already been completely eradicated. Following that was some news on the sword test conference. Zhuemo wasn't very interested. Suddenly, his head felt like it was cracking. Zhuemo grunted as he hugged his head. His consciousness was wounded. The greatest pain in a life came when a beautiful woman dropped out of the sky, but at the same time, there also dropped a nasty dragon that guarded the beauty. Even more painful was just when they saw the peerless face of the beauty, they were kicked by the evil dragon at the weak spot. Zhuemo wailed inside. Fixing his consciousness was his most important priority right now. However, to a low-level Xiuzha with only the cultivation of Lianqi 8th level, fixing consciousness was a question that was far out of his power. Pain. It was like the deepest part of the brain was being lightly craved by someone using a small knife. Just a while and Zhuemo was almost insane. Hugging his head as he sat on the roof, the painful groans continued. Zhuemo wanted to cry. Holding his head, he almost crawled to move to the meditation mat in the seclusion room. His only hope right now was that mediation could decrease the pain. Very quickly, the cruel reality destroyed his last hope. No matter how he used the Ling energy, the pain of his spirit didn't lessen. His entire person seemed to have been chopped in two, but his body was well. He hugged his head, rolling and groaning on the floor. Gradually, the sound of wailing became lower. Those who are ignorant have no fear. He had only the most pitiful understanding of the spirit. If his cultivation was just a bit deeper, he would understand more and wouldn't dare to be so impulsive. Fixing a consciousness, even those Xiuzha who had a cultivation of Ningmai, didn't have many solutions. Unless Jindan cultivators lent a hand, fixing would be easier. But, if a Jindan gave aid, that price definitely wasn't a small one. Low-level Xiuzha didn't dare to touch the spirit. Not even the Zen Shio who specialized in the consciousness, before the stage of Jindan, they also wouldn't dare. Zhuemo was just a low-level Xiuzha who just achieved the 8th level of Lianqi. His sea of consciousness suffered 2 continuous blows that far surpassed his ability to bear. The fact that he didn't already die was a miracle. A wound to the consciousness, if there wasn't an outside power to heal it, it wouldn't disappear. The pitiful Zhuemo curled completely into a ball. He didn't have the strength to roll anymore. His breathing was shallow, his awareness fuzzy. Faintly, he seemed to hear someone was talking. Thou wants to live. A simple and desolate voice, upright and imposing. Save me. Zhuemo heard his weak answer filled with joy and pleading. To abide by my ceremony, to execute my desires, to give my oath, will thou? Too outrageous. Zhuemo, on his last breaths, couldn't help but wail. He suddenly had the feeling he had been tricked. Will thou? The imposing voice was like thunder, filled with oppression. Go to hell. Zhuemo unexpectedly raged, don't assume that I don't know it's you that tricked. He still wanted to curse, but the pain of his spirit was so extreme he couldn't help but scream. Will thou? Go to hell. Zhuemo swore as he screamed. At the same time, he raised his middle finger. Will thou? Go to hell. Zhuemo didn't even have the energy to scream, much less raise the middle finger. He could only weakly whine. Will thou go to hell? Zhuemo's answer was like the whine of a mosquito, the sound thin, like a hair strand. Will thou go to hell? Zhuemo's awareness was a puddle of dizziness as he struggled. That imposing and authoritative sound finally silenced. At this time, Zhuemo's awareness was completely muddled, everything in the surroundings indistinct. In his dizziness, he didn't know if it was his delusion. That voice spoke again, no dignity left, only loneliness. The ceremony lost, the desire dead, only the oath once taken, the voice seemed further and further away from him. He became unconscious. In the sea of consciousness of Zhuemo, who was in a coma, that black dandelion seed that had been floating quietly landed. As it landed, it penetrated into the sea of consciousness, grew roots, germinated, bloomed, bore fruit. Countless black dandelion seeds continuously spilled, floating to every corner of Zhuemo's consciousness. In the blink of an eye, the sea of consciousness became a black sea. The black sea suddenly broke. Countless fragments floated up like black flowers, turning into countless wisps of black smoke. The black smoke transformed into a figure of a person. Chapter 17. Zhuemo slowly woke up. His head was still aching, but compared to the pain that had cut through his entire body, it was much less. Thinking of what had happened before he went unconscious, his face suddenly changed. He always had been one with a clear mind. Under the situation where his head was aware and he could think clearly, he quickly organized the cause and result. Without any great need to think, it was definitely that black dandelion seed that was the culprit. The one that released the sword essence was him. And the one that pressured him was also that one. Thinking about it, Zhuemo's heart burned in anger. That guy tried to play tricks on his head, he didn't know what he was getting into. He suddenly thought that he had said something before he went unconscious, and his face changed. Was it that he didn't persevere and had capitulated? Thinking about this, he quickly calmed his mind and entered his consciousness. When he enters the sea, he was stupefied. On the undulating hills, it was groups of large ancient trees. The green grass was like a carpet, spreading out in patches. Fine wild flowers mixed within the grass, adding hints of life. It was as though he walked into a forest. Before, his sea of consciousness was only empty space. This living and breathing scene in front of him. Zhuemo was completely pinned to the ground. The scene in front of his eye far surpassed the limits of his understanding. He dazedly walked on the grass, feeling the softness of the grass under his feet. The smell of the green grass wafted into his nose. Zhuemo was dazed. He was only an 8th level Lianqi low-level Shouja. When his gaze turned towards a hill without any trees, he instantly came back. He started to run like a maniac towards that hill. On the hill, a man dressed in black was sitting on a stele, black clouds moving around it. One hand was lying on the leg, another propped up his chin, his expression carefree and pleased. When he neared, Zhuemo finally made out the black-clad man's appearance. A perfect face. Zhuemo had never known men could be so handsome. An androgynous face, a high nose, the raven-back hair covering up the left eye, the right eye as narrow and long as a blade, the serene crimson-red pupil was like a bottomless blood pool, the thin and wide lips eternally held a shallow yet strange curve. A piece of dark red rhombus-shaped crystals were in each earlobe, the wide black clothing soft and smooth, just like his hair, it gave off a black glow as it kept close to his body, full of a strange enticement. Zhuemo blanked at his position, not knowing what to say. He was only the most normal disciple of a small sect. When had he ever seen someone so outstanding? I am called Pu. A sweet-sounding and beautiful voice. He propped up his chin, looking in interest at Zhuemo, the curve of his mouth more evident. What are you called? Zhuemo. He replied dumbly. He definitely was dreaming. Pooh seemed to be just sitting there, but all the light in the sea of consciousness seemed to have been unconsciously sucked away to him. Zhuemo had seen those female disciples at the eastern peak. Not one of them was better looking than Pooh. When a man looked like this, he probably would want to cry. When this thought came out, Zhuemo came back to awareness. Pooh's enticing and shocking aura was instantly shattered by this humorous thought. Seeming to have noticed Zhuemo returning to his senses, Pooh smiled gently, and wasn't irritated. He still used his melodious voice. It seems we will have to be in contact for a long time. But I believe we will have delightful interactions. Oh, right, this is for you. Pooh casually threw a glowing ball at Zhuemo. On the surface of the ball, countless seals flashed. What is it? Zhuemo instinctively received the glowing ball. Boom! It was as though he was struck by thunder, his body frozen. Countless characters were shoved into his mind, circulating relentlessly. Embryonic breathing spirit cultivation, just a little plaything. It can repair your spirit, count that as a greeting gift. Pooh's tone was lazy. Even though I want to live for free, but there's no other way. Your sea of consciousness is so broken. Fix the sea of consciousness quickly, otherwise I have to find another place again. He gracefully waved his hand. Zhuemo, still unmoving at his spot, felt the space around his body tighten. When he opened his eyes, he found that he had come out of his sea of consciousness. His heart was suddenly terrified. Pooh seemed to be even stronger than he had imagined. A person like this that he couldn't control in his consciousness, no wait, controlling his sea of consciousness. He had no joy at receiving, embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. Terror spread through his body like poison. Managing to swallow his saliva and suppressing the terror in his heart, he pondered what to do. Report to the sect. In these 2 years, he had only seen the head of the sect once. That was when he had been picked by the leader and when he opened his eyes. As to the other elders and Shishu, he had never even met them. What he was really worried about was another conjecture. He was very suspicious. Pooh was very likely to be a Yaoma. Such a beautiful Yaoma, he almost couldn't believe it, but for some reason, this suspicion was like a maggot burrowing into the bones, taking root in his mind, unable to be swept away. Zhuemo had never seen Yaoma. All his ideas about Yaoma came from the sound tablet. When it mentioned Yaoma, it was killing, it was death and bleeding. But the between Yaoma and Shouja were that of natural enemies, he was very clear about that. Destroying Yaoma was the duty of each Shouja, no matter where. However, Zhuemo was a beginner Shouja whose cultivation just reached the 8th level of Lianqi. Not speaking of destroying Yaoma, the Yaoma wouldn't even lower themselves to destroying him. What he was more worried about was that if someone else knew that a Yaoma was in his body, he definitely would be destroyed, ground until not a trace could be found. In the eyes of those higher-level Shouja, just an 8th-level Lianqi like him, he couldn't even be considered cannon fodder. Maybe, they would throw him straight into the Dan, furnace and get refined with the Yaoma. He couldn't help but shudder, his heart beating furiously. He quickly stopped those terrifying thoughts. In a daze, for the next 2 days, Zhuemo seemed to not be in this mortal coil. He naturally had to practice embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Otherwise, before he could be crippled by Pu Yao, he would cripple himself first. Pu Yao, that was the new name Zhuemo gave Pu. Regardless if he was a Yao, just how he looked, he deserved the character of Yao. The effects were very good. After a few days, half of his spirit had recovered. But Zhuemo felt no gratefulness towards Pu Yao. Because he finally remembered, the reason that his consciousness was wounded, it was Pu Yao's fault. In these few days, he didn't go to his sea of consciousness. If it was said at the first glance, the deepest impression Pu Yao left on Zhuemo was enchanting. Now, enchanting changed to wicked. What did the guy really want? That was the true cause of the terror. Zhuemo quickly found that his life became incomparably terrible. To a Shilja whose goal was to become a ling plant farmer, living was the most important. He decided to have a discussion with Pu Yao. Just like last time, Pu Yao sat on the steel idly, in the same black clothing. Seeing Zhuemo, he smiled. That smile coming among the thick black smoke revolving around, it made him look full of evil. The conjecture about whether or not Pu was Yaomao jumped out again of its own accord. Zhuemo's heart shook. He didn't lack in courage, but when the other was in complete control, he wouldn't do such a stupid thing as to express bravery. He suddenly noticed the stone steel under Pu's body. Half a person high, the stone steel was shrouded in black clouds. When he accidentally swept across the surface of the stone steel, he couldn't help but be shocked. Grave. This was a grave. It wasn't a stone steel, it was a gravestone. He instantly was frightened, his heartbeat speeding up. What? Wanted to find me for a chat? A lazy voice. He didn't know if it was this gravestone at fault, but Zhuemo felt that Pu's voice was full of a kind of dark coldness that easily seeped into one's heart. Zhuemo calmed his emotions, a fawning smile on his face. Look, my cultivation is this weak, and my body is all bones, there isn't a few caddies of meat, not good to eat. Eat? Pu suddenly smiled. He opened his dark red right eye, slowly speaking of delicious human meat, oh, that's so long ago. The best human meat, there's a lot to consider. The best is 16 or 17-year-old girls. Tender meat, crunchy bones. Yum, yum. A scarlet tongue licked the lips, his expression full of reflection. Zhuemo's heart was beating out of his chest. He forced a smile. Yeah, see, shouldn't you change a person? Change a person? Pu tilted his head, staring at Zhuemo. What? You don't like it? Feeling that I took over your space? Being pierced by Pu's deep red right eyes, cold spread through Zhuemo's heart. He hurriedly waved his hand. No. This is my honor. Honor. He seemed to be very satisfied with Zhuemo's answer. Pu took away his gaze, his right eye closing again, his mouth absent-mindedly asking, in your generation of disciples, how many are Jin Dan? 10. Zhuemo shook his head. 8. Zhuemo continued to shake his head. 5. Zhuemo finally couldn't endure it. He felt the other was making fun of him, not a single one. In the Xixiang of this generation, the highest cultivation is the last stages of Zhuji. For the first time, a shocked expression came onto Pu's face with his closed right eye. This made Zhuemo feel smug. After a while, Pu shook his head, sighing, no wonder you suck so much. Zhuemo almost spat blood. Pu opened his eye, his gaze once again landing on Zhuemo's body. He examined up and down, his hand propping up his chin, murmuring to himself, the body is really weak. Zhuemo was very irritated at how the other was discussing him like he was examining an object, but Pu's made his heart jump. Is something wrong? He couldn't ask hurriedly. He knew his body wasn't normal. The hard zombie face, and that dream that appeared countless times, it was like a thorn in his heart. Pu lifted his head, the hair in front of his forehead almost covering the left half of his face. The crimson right eye that wasn't covered glanced at Zhuemo's face, one corner of his mouth lifting, no problem. All right, you suck very much, but not to a terminal point. Pu returned back to his lazy tone of voice. I wanted to ask, Zhuemo decided to lay his cards on the table with Pu. He wanted to find out what Pu's true aims were. Oh, right. Pu interrupted Zhuemo. His blood-red right eye narrowed, his thin lips lifting upward on an angle, started practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. How is it, is the effects all right? Almost forgot to tell you, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation is good, but it has one pesky problem. Mo's heart beat frantically. He had a bad feeling. Once, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation is started, it can't be stopped. Supposedly, if one can't get to the first embryonic breath in 3 months, there would be some minor problems. He raised his right hand, spreading his 5 fingers, the corner of his mouth raising higher, the fresh red of his eye even brighter. Really, it's just small pains such as blood flowing in reverse. Oh, did you know, before I had a very creative friend. He was in charge of the torture prisons. Pooh seemed to be telling a story, actively narrating. One time, he encountered a very hard nut. He tried everything but couldn't break open this guy's mouth. He then begged for this method from me. He sent a subordinate to pretend to be a criminal and near this guy. And then, using his subordinate's mouth, he passed this scripture over to him. Oh, you have to know, I always admired this guy. Creative, and patient. He said with a few hints of glee, such a pity that this criminal didn't have much talent. 3 months, he didn't reach 1 embryonic breath. Oh, I always felt, it must have been that my friend purposefully left out a few words. And then? Mo asked, his voice shaking. And then? The smile on Pooh's face became even brighter, cracked on the 31st day. But my friend was a soft-hearted one and didn't kill him. Left him hanging for 3 months. Each day, he begged my friend to kill him. Listening to the exquisite and mellow wailing, such an experience. Supposedly, when he died, oh, his soul just exploded like a firework, extremely beautiful. A bone-aching cold spread over Mo's entire body. His pitiful nerves were like a spring that was pushed to its limits. All the accumulated anger exploded in 1 instant. He lost his rationality and screamed as he leapt at Pooh. You perverse Renyao. Ye'll kill you. It is pronounced a bit like Pooh. The character used is the same one that is usually used for dandelion. Pill, pellet. Common used as pills of immortality by Chinese emperors in search of eternal life. A gaming equivalent would be potions. Big Brother. Hong Kong slang for Thailand transvestites. It was then adopted as internet slang for males that used female avatars in MMORPGs. It's also used to describe girliness in boys. The literal meaning is human spirit. In this case here, Pooh is really a Yao, and he does look androgynous. Chapter 18 Soup in the seclusion room. Mo mediated with his legs in the lotus position. He was furiously practicing embryonic breathing spirit cultivation, the damned embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. The damned Pooh Yao. He cursed the maniac countless times. After exploding yesterday night, he was brutally oppressed. His consciousness was once again heavily wounded, torn to pieces by Pooh Yao. The result of the wounds in his consciousness was the heart-wrenching pain. Now, without needing Pooh Yao's urging, he furiously practiced embryonic breathing spirit cultivation. Once his head cooled down, Mo wanted to cry. That night, he should have never gone to the Ling fields. Thinking about Pooh Yao, that coldness and cunning that could burrow into the bones, it was like a venomous snake slowly sliding up the bottom of his pants. That uncontrollable terror spread through the entire body. The brutal suppression last night, it also made him attain a deep understanding of an unattainable gap between the power levels of the two of them. A strong, perverse madman. Mo already expected that his future was a patch of darkness. This guy didn't have goodwill from the very start. From the Black Sea in the beginning, to the sword energy, and his spirit being wounded, then to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, step by step, he became the lamb being led to slaughter. The pitiful him, he had though that there was only a bad-tempered neighbor living in there, he didn't think it was a wicked Yamo. If he was only suspicious before, now he was 100% sure that Pooh was Yamo. Other than Yamo, who would be so evil? Slowly waking up, like the chaos before creation, Mo opened his eyes and lightly breathed out that breath of air that had been circulating inside his body all this time. This breath was long and continuous. When it was being exhaled, it was as concise as an arrow. Mo felt slightly reassured. This, embryonic breathing spirit cultivation, was a miracle. The pain in his spirit had lessened greatly and he could clearly feel his spirit stabilizing. When Pu Yao had just flicked his finger last night, his consciousness had almost been completely scattered. He didn't know where embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation came from. The words were cryptic and hard to understand. The syntax it used was the opposite of the jade stick that Mo had brought. He had used a lot of energy before he barely managed to understand the first chapter. He didn't think to go ask Pu Yao. The lessons in tears and blood told him, to try to take advantage of that guy, just wait to get tricked. The first chapter was called, Chapter of Spiritual Concentration. It talked about how to meditate and condense the spirit, stabilizing the consciousness. This was exactly what Mo needed at the moment. After continuous injury, his consciousness was almost in shreds. If he couldn't fix it soon, it was probably that he could enter madness. As to the one breath Pu Yao mentioned, it meant being able to complete a whole embryonic breath. Embryonic breath was the core of embryonic breath spiritual cultivation, and it was the most basic cultivation method. It was also a kind of breathing that Mo hadn't even heard of. Supposedly, it originated in the breathing of humans when they were embryos. They didn't need to use mouth and nose to breath, but required to use the entire body as opening, take the air as thin strands and suck it in bit by bit before spreading it throughout the body. Hundreds of these tiny streams of air would circulate through the body, merge and then exhaled through the nose and mouth. The holes and points on the body were like the stars in a galaxy. They couldn't be measured. The nose and mouth were the biggest, the points on the body were second. The most abundant were those small, unable to be seen tiny holes that spread around the body. Mo was very curious how the elder that had created this scripture had thought of such an outlandish method. Like goes with like. The scripture that Pu Yao, that crazy abnormal madman, threw out, it was just as abnormal as him. He still couldn't find a way to finish a whole embryonic breath. Pu Yao's words weren't empty threats. It was clearly written in the embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The last few days, he was really still using his nose and mouth to breath. No matter what, his first priority was stabilizing his spirit. If his spirit was unstable, just the occasional pain was enough to take Mo's little life. But when Mo's consciousness managed to slightly stabilize, he would have to face a question. The question of completing a whole embryonic breath. One breath, it was the trademark of the introduction to embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The deadline of 3 months was like a cloud over his head. When he thought about the light of insanity in Pu Yao's eyes when he talked about torture, Mo was certain if he really couldn't achieve one breath in the 3 months and was facing a reversal of blood flow, Pu Yao would be watching in interest from the side at his painful state. Such a tragic life. Mo gritted his teeth and cursed the Renyao inside, the fires of anger burning. Suddenly, news from the sound tablet beside him aroused his attention. Continuing after the increase in price of the Ling grains last month, this month's Ling grains price once again increases. The demand for high-grade Ling grains has greatly increased, pulling along the price of low-grade Ling grains to also increase. He shook. The price of Ling grains were rising. This was undoubtedly the best news he heard in the last few days. Pu Yao suddenly came out, such an interesting thing. Mo started with wide eyes. A long pause later, he finally managed to react, pointing at Pu Yao, incoherently asking, You ran out? Pu Yao blinked his dark red right eye, why can't I come out? Don't you have to stay in the consciousness? Mo asked dumbly. Who told you that? Pu Yao turned to him, face baffled, as he asked in return. Mo was speechless. Inside, he couldn't help but wail. It seemed that he didn't even have the last bit of bargaining power. So the other could really move out. Pu Yao listened for a while and yawned. Oh, looks like a war is starting. War. Sui Mo didn't understand. Pu Yao didn't explain. He swept the sound tablet into his grasp, and faintly stated, "This thing is mine now." Before the voice landed, he disappeared with the sound tablet. Damned Ren Yao. Sui Mo's furious shout echoed in empty yard. At this time, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. Sui Mo was curious inside. Who could it be? Usually, no one would run to his place here. Running over and opening the door, Xiaoguo pitifully stood outside. She was holding a clay pot in her hands. Seeing Sui Mo, her body instantly shrunk back, and timidly greeted, "Xixiang. What's the problem now?" Sui Mo rarely had a good mood for this little bit of trouble. For some reason, whenever he saw the timidity on Xiaoguo's face, he could never control his tone of voice. "No, no." Xiaoguo shook her head like a rattledrum, hurriedly explaining, "Xiaoguo has come to give something to Xixiang. Last time when Xixiang helped Xiaoguo, Xiaoguo hadn't thanked Xixiang." As she spoke, her little mouth twisted, and the mist in her eyes rose. With tears in her voice, she muttered, "Xiaoguo doesn't have Jingshi." Seeing the direction wasn't right, Sui Mo hurriedly shouted, "Stop." Xiaoguo was frightened to shrink back even more, but her crying instantly disappeared. She carefully put the clay pot in front of Sui Mo and like a rabbit, she jumped back. She timidly looked at Sui Mo and gathered her courage to say, "This is some soup Xiaoguo made, Xixiang, Xixiang, just take a sip, you just have to take one sip." Before she could finish speaking, she descended into incoherency, her face so red due to anxiety it almost bled. She couldn't control it and covered her face as she turned and ran. After running a few dozen steps, she suddenly stopped. Hesitating, she turned and yelled, "Xixiang, if it really doesn't taste good, you should throw it out." Sui Mo watched as Xiaoguo disappeared and then at the clay pot in front of his feet. He bent down and lifted it. The soup was still warm. Raising the clay pot, he took a mouthful. The soup was thick and fragrant. "The taste isn't bad," Sui Mo said to himself. He drained it to the bottom and turned, holding the empty pot, to go back to his room. Pu Yao suddenly emerged, the crimson snake-like tongue unable to resist licking the lips, his two eyes gazing in the direction Xiaoguo disappeared in. Such a tender little girl. Sui Mo stared in shock at him. Pu Yao turned around his peerlessly handsome face. At this time, he seemed like a gluttonous cat, the light flashing in his deep red eye. Such good lucky, this little girl's meat definitely would be very tender and delicious. Sui Mo suddenly erupted, raising his hand to viciously throw the empty pot in his right hand at Pu Yao. Bang, the pot cracked, the pieces scattering. "Get lost." The thousand-winged ship stopped in midair. Li Xian looked at the green moon star outside the window, her fine brows furrowed. It seems that the little Yao ran away. "Uncle Qi Yi, has there been a reply from the sect?" Qi Yi Zhenren shook his head. "Miss, there are thousands of Yaoma suppressed under the Yao smelting tower. And it was a long time ago, there's nothing to research. Most of them came from the great battle 3,000 years ago, captured by our sect's supreme power. Most of these Yaoma are ones of great power, difficult to kill, so they were suppressed under the Yao smelting power, to be slowly destroyed. I've never thought that these Yaoma were this tenacious. After 3,000 years, yet there were still survivors." Li Xian revealed a reminiscing expression. 3,000 years ago, our sect was so strong." Qi Yi Zhenren sighed as well, "Not just our sect. 3,000 years ago, each sect in the cultivation world were far more powerful than now. The 10,000-strong alliance of the Yaoma were completely eradicated by the elders. And it was that battle that the Xiuzha established today's status." And then he gave an expression full of pity. "However, even though the Yaoma were almost completely captured, but the Xiuzha were also greatly wounded. Only 1 in 10 of the great powers remained. Many sects fell in that great war, countless scriptures were lost. 3,000 years, and the Xiuzhi still cannot recover to the prosperity of the past. However, compared to us, the blow the Yaomua suffered were even greater. These years, have you seen them ever break through the bloody sky metropolis Jie? Li Xian'er listened, entranced. Even though it was history she already knew, but hearing it each time, it still captured her mind. Grandpa is calling me back. She pouted her little mouth, face full of unwillingness. It was so hard getting a chance to come out, and this was so short, and he's urging me back. We didn't even catch the little Yao yet. If we return, it should wait after I catch the little Yao. Qi Yizhenren looked at the innocence on her face, and a hint of indulgence flashed across his face, but he still urged, "Miss," the sect leader urging Miss to go back, "it's probably due to another matter." What matter could there be? She lightly snorted, "Probably just another genius of some sect that has come. Grandpa is really obsessed with those sword shio lately. I really hate the sword shio, each of them arrogant and disrespectful." Qi Yizhenren smiled, replying, "These days, didn't Miss play very happily with a sword shio?" "You mean that funny idiot, who said he's a sword shio?" Li Xian'er refuted. Tian Yujie is the territory of sword shio. Here, out of 10 people, 9 are sword shio. Maybe he's just that one. Li Xian'er objected. She suddenly revealed a distressed expression, returning, "I won't have a way to use the little 1,000 cranes. It was so hard to find an interesting person, but I can't play anymore." Seeing the vexation on her face, Qi Yizhenren couldn't bear it. "If Miss likes it, why don't I make a transportation formation at Tian Yujie and get a disciple to guard it? Miss 1,000 guide crane can come through the transportation formation. Once it gets over, the 1,000 guide crane can automatically find him." Li Xian'er was happy. "Uncle Qi Yi is the best." Haha, he probably still assumes that Xian'er's paper crane is the normal little 1,000 cranes. Qi Yizhenren's heart was comforted, and he smiled, complimenting, "The 1,000 guide crane that Miss invented, even the elders in the sect praise it." Li Xian'er proudly pouted, "Of course." Chapter 19 Shixiang Wei Sheng. The breeze blew coolly. Again and again, Zuomo practiced the finger movements. The fingers moved faster and fast, but suddenly, with a crisp sound, the fingers paused and turned into a mess. This was already the 7th time. Practicing finger motions today, he wasn't successful once. Exhaling a long breath, he suppressed the fretfulness in his heart. The finger motions of the art of flora were complicated. If his mind wasn't calm, it was easy to make mistakes. But how could Zuomo calm down his mind? 2 months have passed, but he still couldn't complete one embryonic breath. That wasn't what made him most discouraged, was that he was unable to find the door. Before, no matter if he was studying, Little Art of Cloud and Rain, or the other 4 spells in the jade stick that he had brought, even if he temporarily could understand, but at the very least, he knew in which direction to work in. But after he fixed his consciousness using embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he couldn't find the direction. He wanted to spend more time, however, the amount of time spent practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation couldn't be over 4 hours. The ball of light hadn't explicitly stated why it couldn't surpass 4 hours, but Zuomo was suspicious it could cause harm, so he didn't dare to experiment. According to the directions in the ball, he only needed to stop breathing with the nose and mouth before he would be able to turn to embryonic breathing. But not matter how he closed his breathing, the instinct for living always made him unconsciously open his mouth. He couldn't even find the feeling of the embryonic breathing. In the following 2 months, other than his consciousness recovering to full health, he hadn't made any new breakthroughs. In the rest of the time, he could only practice other spells. What was unexpected to him were that the great speeds his Ling energy and spell work improved. Especially his spell work. Other than Little Art of Cloud and Rain, and Art of Aged Gold, in just 2 short months, he managed to elevate the remaining 3 spells to the second level. This kind of speed, even he found it unimaginable. Other than joy, his heart was also worried. Embryonic breathing spirit cultivation hadn't improved at all. There was only 1 month left until the 3-month deadline. Whether a reversal of blood flow was as horrifying as Pu Yao said, he wasn't clear, but any of the feelings he got from the 4 words were not good ones. He tried to ask for aid from Pu Yao, but Pu Yao's sneer instantly provoked him. For some unknown reason, he was easily enraged in front of Pu Yao. The Ling grains had a bountiful harvest. Compared to the other Shixiang, the output of his Ling grains were clearly higher. In the disaster last time, even though his Ling grains were affected, but the situation had been much better than Old Black and the others. After that, he basically didn't try to conceal it. Art of Flora, Art of Earth Energy, Art of Aged Gold, were all used. Only, Art of Crimson Flame, due to the fact that it was opposite the Yin attribute of the Ling grains, was not used. Adding on the 5 mu of Ling fields in the yard, the overall output far surpassed his estimates. Taking out the rent for the sect, he kept a portion of the Ling grains for his own use before selling all of the rest. His income was 62 pieces of second-grade Jingxue. Adding on the 15 pieces of second-grade Jingxue from last time from Liying Feng, his total assets now totaled 77 pieces of second-grade Jingxue. The reason that he had profited so much was that the price of Ling grains were increasing. Even Old Black, so seriously affected by the calamity, had enough to pay the sect's rent. It could be seen just how much the price of Ling grains had grown on the market. And the other thing that made Zhuo Mo worried was how Min Shiji and Luo Li Shixiang. Up until now, those two still hadn't returned to the sect. In the past few days, he had found that some of the Ling herbs in the medicine fields of Cold Mist Valley were showing hints of illness. Taking care of Ling herbs was an extremely meticulous job, much more care was needed than taking care of Ling grains. His own, little art of cloud and rain, could only guarantee their water intake. From the perspective of the plant, this was just its most basic requirement. In the short term, nothing could be seen, but as time passed, it was easy for problems to occur. At present, he was hard-pressed. His purse had become the fullest it had ever been, yet he didn't have any joy. The damned, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The horrid Hao Min Shiji and Luo Li Shixiang. And the twice accursed Pu Yao. Why was it that Ji has such a kind heart yet have to face such evil? He wanted to cry. In the previous few days, other than embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he spent all of the other time on Art of Aged Gold. In the 5 arts that a Ling plant farmer required, at least 3 had to reach the 3rd level. Zhuo Mo's little art of cloud and rain had already reached the 4th level. And in the 4 remaining arts, the one most likely to reach the 3rd level was Art of Aged Gold. Today, he didn't have the mood to practice Art of Aged Gold. He widened his eyes, frantically running over every word in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, in his head. If his face could have expressions, then right now it would be twisted into a ball. 1 month. Only 1 month left. Biting the corner of his lip, he carefully thought over every word. Pu Yao was still sneering. This completely aroused the stubbornness in Zhuo Mo's bones. The damned bastard. By now, he finally understood why he was easily provoked in front of Pu Yao. Pu Yao could easily tear away a person's disguise. He would explicitly or implicitly guide the other's emotions and expose the other's most basic personality. And once he knew that, to someone of such cunning like Pu Yao, swearing wouldn't really provoke him, Zhuo Mo didn't try to restrain his own emotions anymore. If he couldn't vent, he felt that he would, under the damned Renyao's attacks, die. As to suffering a little, he didn't care. Even if he was obedient, would Pu Yao be kind to him? That would be clear even if one used a toe to think. It was better to get some back verbally, and he would feel better. Gu is a little stalk of grass, no matter how you blow, you can't blow me down. Thud thud thud. A series of urgent knocks sounded. Little Moge, Moge. It was Old Black. Why did he come? Mo controlled his fretful heart and stood to open the door. Opening the door, as expected, it was Old Black's wind-blown face, but there was an unfamiliar male standing beside him. Seeing Mo, Old Black released a breath. Oh good, you're here. Finishing, he introduced the male beside him. This is Wei Sheng Xixiang. Wei Sheng. Mo was slightly shocked. This male stranger in front of him was the head of the outer sect disciples, Wei Sheng. He couldn't help staring in examination. Not very tall, thick and broad shoulders, square face, thick brows. He looked extremely honest, but the flickers of light that occasionally came from the pair of eyes made one unable to underestimate him. Wei Sheng Xixiang. Mo made a greeting. Wei Sheng Xixiang rarely showed his face outside, but his reputation within the outer sect disciples was extremely high. To have good relationships with this kind of person, there were only benefits and no drawbacks. Wei Sheng scrutinized Mo for a few seconds and returned the greeting, smiling warmly and responding, Mo shitty is really hidden deep. Mo was slightly shocked, but he wasn't too surprised. Wei Sheng Xixiang's cultivation was higher than him. His mouth was humble, Xixiang over compliments. Come, let's come in to talk. The three walked into the yard. Wei Sheng gazed at the surroundings and praised, such a big yard. And Old Black's two eyes were rooted to the ling fields in the yard. A beat later, he said, vexed, why didn't I think of this way? Isn't this exempt from the rent? Mo smiled, saying, I'm just taking advantage. I don't know which Xixiang built this yard, and put in 5 mu of ling fields. But it was a pity that it was barren for too long. The grade dropped 1 grade ling fields, at least it's better than nothing. Old Black gave a sorrowful expression, such a pity to waste the good ling fields. Mo didn't speak. He didn't know if it was that Old Black had farmed for too long, but towards ling fields, Old Black had an unique affection. Even the yard is all ling fields. Mo shitty really lives up to being a farming madman. It seems that I found the right person this time. Wei Sheng added. The three sat down under the old tree. Mo quickly boiled a pot of tea. His art of crimson flame was only on the first level, and he could only form a small ball of fire, which wasn't very useful. But it was convenient to use to lit fires. Xixiang was looking for me. Mo didn't decline and headed straight for the main topic. Have you encountered something? Sure, she might be limited in cultivation, but if I can add in an effort, I will certainly do so. Wei Sheng didn't stand on courtesy. Coming this time, it really is to trouble shitty with something. He carefully took out from his bosom a jade box. Opening the jade box, a flow of extremely thick ling energy wafted out, a stalk of ling herb inside. This ling herb was about 30 centimeters long, leaves fire red, a black line running through. Contrasting against the red leaves was a completely green fruit. If the muscles on his face weren't paralyzed, Mo's expression would have been very rich. The ling plant that he couldn't name was shockingly thick with ling energy. He cautiously took it up, putting it in front of his eyes for examination. The ling plant seemed to have been carved out of a piece of red fire jade, translucent and glowing. Definitely 3rd grade and above. In this segment of time, as he helped Hao Min Shiji take care of the medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley, his knowledge in the subject of ling herbs broadened greatly. He might not be able to call out its name, but from the appearance and the ling energy it emitted, it was better than most of the ling herbs in Cold Mist Valley. This fire dragon grass, its grade is a rare 3rd grade, and was very hard to find. Wei Sheng's expression was solemn. There is still a length of time before I reach Chuji. In this time, I ask for shitty to help take care of this fire dragon grass for me. Take care. Mo was surprised. His response was extremely quick. is Xixiang using this fire dragon grass to Zhuji? If Wei Xing didn't say this was fire dragon grass, Zhua Mo probably wouldn't have recognized it. Was it because it was third grade? This fire dragon grass was very different from the one in Zhua Mo's memory. Yes. Wei Xing nodded, his face calm. At the side, Zhua Mo and Old Black couldn't help but give an admiring look. There were many ling herbs that were required for Zhuji, but only a few of the primary herbs were the crucial ones. Fire dragon grass was one of them, but not the best choice because it needed to be consumed raw and its effects were violent. Someone without great willpower might not be able to endure the violent nature and cause the ling energy of the body to dissipate. These years, there were very few that would use it to finish Zhuji. However, even though fire dragon grass was akin to a poison, but if one overcame it, it was extremely beneficial to the cultivation. The effect was much better than normal ling herbs. But third-grade fire dragon grass, think how violent the effects would be. In just a few words, Zhua Mo felt respect form for this Xixiang that he just met for the first time. He had heard some of the rumors about Wei Xing Xixiang. Supposedly, Xixiang had been orphaned from young. After he was taken into the sect, he was entranced with cultivating the sword. In order to learn a better sword art, he didn't even hesitate about going to Luo Li Xixiang's place to be a sword servant. Meeting him today, Zhua Mo found that Wei Xing Xixiang lived up to the rumors. Chapter 20 Obsession. He lowered his head to think for a moment before raising his head. Shidi admires Xixiang's bravery. But the ling herb is third grade. If it cannot be planted in third grade or above ling fields, the ling energy would likely dissipate and the grade will drop. Wei Xing's expression changed but recovered. He smiled, responding, "If that's the case, it will mean I won't have to suffer the pain." Compared to the calmness on Wei Xing's face, there was heavy worry on Old Black's face. His heart considering for a second, Zhua Mo quickly organized his words. Little brother might have a solution to try. "Oh, Shidi, please tell." Wei Xing's mood roused. "I have been requested by Hao Min Shiji to take care of the medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley. I saw that many of the fields in the valley are empty. We could plant it in the valley. I'm just worried if Hao Min Shiji returns before Xixiang enters Zhuji, something will happen." Wei Xing's expression became joyful. Shidi doesn't have to worry. Hao Min Shiji and Luo Li Xixiang wouldn't come back so quickly. Zhua Mo finally remembered that Wei Xing Xixiang was Luo Li Xixiang's sword servant. He probably knew where the two people had gone. He was naturally willing to be able to help Wei Xing Xixiang, but thinking about the fact that Hao Min Shiji wouldn't be returning soon, his mood instantly darkened. He was extremely careful every day, fearful that something would go wrong in the medicine fields. It was like a hot potato. Sorting out his emotions, Zhua Mo smiled, declaring, "Then it's good. I will first congratulate Xixiang for successfully Zhuji." Wei Xing waved his hand. "It's too early to say those things." Finishing, he took out a jade stick, handing it to Zhua Mo. "Xixiang doesn't have many possession, and nothing to give out. This is some of the experiences that Xixiang had these years. Hopefully they would help Shidi." Zhua Mo was overcome with joy. He had always been along in learning with no one to discuss with. Wei Xing Xixiang's cultivation was only just higher than him, but his experiences and realizations were just what he needed and could use. He wasn't courteous and gleefully took it. "Many thanks, Xixiang." After the three chatted for a while, Wei Xing and Old Black stood and made their farewells. After the two left, Zhua Mo hurriedly took the fire dragon grass to Cold Mist Valley. The medicine fields in Cold Mist Valley were third grade and Zhua Mo had been drooling after them. He didn't know much about ling herbs but he knew what the price of third grade ling grains were. Finding a patch of empty ground, he carefully planted the fire dragon grass. And then he cast, Little Art of Cloud and Rain. The effect of the fourth level of, Little Art of Cloud and Rain, was extremely evident. The fire dragon grass quickly recovered its vitality, the leaves becoming even shiner. Greedily inhaling the thick Ling energy in the air, Mo exclaimed inside, third grade was really third grade. He made another circle around the medicine fields. Finding no problems, he left. When he returned home, the sky was already dark. Sitting on the rooftop, Mo suddenly thought if he couldn't complete one breath in the 1 month of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, then wouldn't he be hampering Wei Xing Xixiang's Shuji? But then he turned it around. If he wasn't successful, he wouldn't even have a life left, how could he care about that? Thinking about Wei Xing Xixiang, he automatically took out the jade stick that Xixiang gave to him and sent Ling energy into the jade stick. Very quickly, he was entranced. The jade stick described in fine details the realizations and experiences of Wei Xing's entire cultivation journey. It was extremely scattered in many places. It could be seen that it was only Xixiang would just casually record down whatever he thought. The rumor that Xixiang was infatuated with the sword wasn't false. The writings in the jade stick were scattered all over, not a system to be found, but the great majority were about sword shio. After reading for a while, Mo's heart started to jump uncontrollably. Those of sword, enter the grounds of death, find life in death, like a wounded soldier, hold the resolution of death, attack with full power, nothing is undefeatable. Traveling night, encounter over 20 blood duck bats, hard battle, injured 21 places, all slaughtered. Streamside met iron ape, skin like steel, hard to wound with blade, tempted enemy 200 so miles, wounded eye, no strength to chase. These phrases were all extremely short, yet the vicious and resolute aura came through the words. Life and death, they were the characters that appeared the most. The Wei Xing Xixiang in the jade stick and the person he saw today were like two people. What made the biggest impression on Mo and gave him the most shock were these few segments. Walked 100 days, finally saw 9 rivers falling over sky, gazed from bottom, galloping and rolling, like the godly thunder of heaven, weight like 30,000 caddies, vast and unending, cannot be resisted. My heart follows, if aura of sword can be so, no regrets in death. Sat and gazed 3 months, thought day and night, but due to dumbness, cannot find the meaning. Stood on top of waterfall 7 days, not sleeping, not drinking or eating, suddenly comprehended. Fish jump following the water and down, moving among, forgetting life and death, consciousness clear, and finally found flavor. Broken bones 13, bedridden half-year, loss hearing and sight, so practiced in heart, Mo fell into a daze, muttering, insane. Such insanity, such obsession, it wasn't anything he had ever thought of. Under the stars, he sat on the roof, hand holding the jade stick as his thoughts wandered. In his own world, there wasn't anything that made him so crazy, so obsessed. He had great talent in the field of the 5 elements. He easily learned any kind of spells. He didn't have high expectations for life. He put effort into learning and comprehending the 5 element spell, it was only so that he could live a better life. The obsession that Wei Xing Xixiang had towards the sword, it gave him an unparalleled blow to his spirit. He could see the sweat and fresh blood behind each character. Something inside his body seemed to be turning and vibrating, making him feel uncomfortable. A long time later, his emotions gradually calmed down, but he didn't have any desire for sleep. Under the night sky, he just started to learn the sword motions according to the sword scripture in the jade stick. There was a set of sword scriptures recorded in the jade stick. It was moves Wei Xing Xixiang had picked out of the sword scriptures he practiced and read every day. Wei Xing Xixiang had rich battle experience and these sword moves were extremely useful. There were not beautiful techniques, it was extremely simple to start with. It was a pity he didn't have a flying sword. After motioning for a while, he could only sit down. Once he sat down, he started to muse about embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation again. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was cryptic, but now he wasn't discouraged at all, only ashamed. The obsession of Wei Xing Shixiang deeply provoked him. Compared to Wei Xing Shixiang, what were the little difficulties that he ran into? Alright, if he wanted to see Ji's humiliation, Pu Yao, wait for the next life. Deeply inhaling a breath, he started to once again investigate this embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation that he couldn't wrap his head around. The days passed one by one. Other than going once a day to Cold Mist Valley, he didn't take a step out any other time. In the sea of consciousness, Pu Yao sat on the gravestone and leisurely listened to the sound tablet. Zhuemo gritted his teeth but still went forward, fawningly asking, Pu, what is really the main point of the first step of embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation? I'm stupid, can't you show a little bit? The first step. Very simple, there's no main point. Pu Yao didn't even raise his eyelids, still listening to the sound tablet. Looking at the sound tablet that Pu Yao held on his leg, Zhuemo thought that since asking didn't work, then it had to be enticement. He asked, Pu, this sound tablet isn't bad, right? Pretty interesting. Pu Yao inattentively responded. Do you want a better one? Zhuemo's voice was like that of a strange uncle that was holding a lollipop to fool little girls. For the first time, Pu Yao opened his right eye, the deep red pupils expressing interest. Want? Zhuemo shook his head. If you help me explain embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, I'll buy a better one, I can buy it myself. Pu Yao said carelessly. He closed his eyes again, listening to the sound tablet. Zhuemo stared with an open mouth. You have Jingxi? No. Pu Yao's eyes were still closed. With a face full of enjoyment, following the music that the sound tablet broadcasted, his body strangely swayed. Zhuemo released a breath, his tone smug again. If there's no Jingxi, you can't buy anything. He suddenly realized, with Pu Yao's strength, if he tried to snatch one, that wasn't impossible. Or he could steal one, he definitely wouldn't leave a trace. You have Jingxi. Pu Yao moved his body following the beat of the music. Then you have to explain. Zhuemo's heart was comforted, and he continued to emphasize the relationship between Jingxi and the sound tablet. Inside, he muttered, thankfully he hadn't thought to just use brute force. Pu impatiently interrupted Zhuemo holding out his right hand. He showed a handful of Jingxi. I can take it myself. Zhuemo was dumbstruck, staring at the Jingxi on Pu Yao's hands. So familiar. After a silent moment, he suddenly gave a sky-shaking bellow like a beast in desperate straits. Damned Renyao! You dare to move Ye's Jingxi, ye will kill. Beside the pond in Cold Mist Valley, Zhuemo gazed at the pond water, scared. The pond water was cold to the bone. He had touched it with his hand. Even now, the palm was still stiff. There was only 3 days left until the last deadline. He still hadn't made it past the gate of the first breath. Pu Yao still didn't seem to care. Zhuemo understood. This guy really didn't care about his life and death. But in these many days, it wasn't he hadn't made any progress. He thought of a method. Right now, he was thinking of trying to find out if this method was right or not. But the rushing waterfall couldn't stop the coldness of the pond water from spreading. Just from beside the pond, he still could feel the oppressive coldness. He nervously licked his lips. He didn't want to try this method. But seeing that there were only 3 days left, he had no other choice. He hesitated for a moment, hardened his heart, closed his eyes, and jumped into the pool. The bone-aching iciness of the pond water seemed to freeze his entire body into an ice cube in an instant. He couldn't help shudder. He was like a rock, continuously sinking. The pond water flowed up his mouth and nose. The outside world seemed to have been blocked off, so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. After the initial panic, Zhuemo quickly calmed down. He then followed embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation to move his breath. He didn't know if it was the stimulation from the cold pond water, but he was abnormally alert. The movement of the breath was abnormally smooth. After 10 minutes, when his breath was almost consumed, the feeling of suffocation became even stronger. Suemo raised his awareness. He knew. The most crucial time had arrived. Before, every time, it was at this step that he would unconsciously open his mouth to breathe. Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation didn't have much elaboration on this step, as though in the eyes of the Shouja that created this scripture, this was the simplest thing. Chapter 21 One breath. He didn't know if embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was correct. Even if he didn't want to admit it, but with Pu Yao's cunning, if he wanted this little life, he only had to curl his fingers. There wasn't a need to use a half-accurate scripture to fool him. But with Pu Yao's perverseness and strange sense of humor, finding ways of torturing him, that was almost certainly the case. However, Pu Yao was usually very quiet. Other than forcing Suemo to cultivate embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, he didn't make any other moves. There wasn't any hint of tormenting. Suemo couldn't understand Pu Yao, and didn't know what was Pu Yao's true aims. Pu Yao definitely had a goal. Sometimes, this thought was extremely clear and certain in his mind. However, when he tried to think about it, he found it was as though he was facing a vast and deep ocean. You never knew what was really hidden at the bottom. Maybe Pu was really trying to help him. Suemo knew just how difficult it was to heal wounds of the spirit. If it wasn't embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, it would still be a question of whether he would be breathing right now. Blaming Pu Yao, it seemed unreasonable. It could only say that Pu's strangeness and sense of perversion made him instinctively afraid. The most tragic thing was that no matter which kind it was, he had no space to rebel. No matter if this embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was true or not, no matter what aims Pu Yao he had no room to rebel. In front of the kind of great existence that was Pu, he was pitifully weak. The only thing he could do was force himself to charge forward in hopes of finding that glimmer of light. If it was really just tormenting, as one already in the situation, he would sink in Pu Yao's torment or make it through. Damn it! How did he provoke such a calamity? Time passed drop by drop, accompanying the strong feeling of suffocation was terror that uncontrollably rose. His awareness started to fade. He was completely unaware of the face his legs were instinctively moving, trying to rise out of the water. But he had been sinking the whole time and it was now too far from the surface. Was he going to die? Even this thought was incomplete, he was paralyzed, weak as he swam in the limitless ocean. No. I can't die. He tried to struggle, tried to wake his own awareness. But all of it was useless. Under the feeling of suffocation, his awareness slowly dissipated, became muddled. Was he really going to die? In a stupor, he seemed to hear someone was yelling. Don't forget. Even in death, you must not forget. For some reason, those two phrases that he considered nightmares seemed to be like a large hand that suddenly pulled him back from unconsciousness. I can't die. Suemo used up the last remaining strength in his body, furiously shouting soundlessly inside. His body shook violently like a sieve, the blood vessels under his skin quickly expanding, visible to the naked eye. Raven black and thick, twisting and turning like earthworms, covering the entire body, unspeakably terrifying. That breath at the chest that had become extremely weak turned into a candle flame, a flame that could be easily extinguished. Yet this weak feeble candle flame became a prairie fire, lighting up the sea of consciousness like lighting up firewood that was bone dry and then soaked in oil. Dark red flames, spitting and roaring, followed the ground in the sea of consciousness, rolling forwards. The grasses and woods instantly turned to dust. Nothing could stop it. In the blink of an eye, the consciousness became a burning hell. Endless dark red flames flickering in every corner of the sea of consciousness. The bright and hot red fire recklessly danced. On the strange black gravestone shrouded in black smoke, there sat a handsome male with a strange cold face. No one was able to forget his beautiful and enticing features. The sound tablet was on his knee. The concentrated sounds of the zither were like a hurricane that made people unable to breathe. The red sea of fire burned soundlessly. Under the hair that blocked half his face, Pu's thin blade-like lips imperceptibly rose on one side. Just as usual, enchanting yet cold. Mo curiously examined the surroundings. After achieving one breath, his perception of the surroundings changed dramatically. It was hard to explicitly describe. It was as though the surroundings had been cleaned, changed beyond recognition. This feeling was extremely unique. It took a long time for him to get used to it. The other change was his sea of consciousness. Right now, it had turned into a sea of fire. A sea of fire that might extinguish sometime. Other than that, he didn't have any new discoveries. As to whether embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation had any good attributes, he didn't have any high hopes. He was just a guy that wanted to be a ling plant farmer. What did he need such a strong consciousness for? If he could pass this obstacle, keep his little life, he was content. The game was too dangerous. Gu won't play. Thinking about the danger yesterday, there were still lingering fears. However, the sharp sword hanging over his head finally disappeared. He could finally release a breath. He resolutely decided that no matter what Pu Yao gave him next time, he wouldn't take it if it meant his heath. The painful experiences gave him a hard lesson. To steal benefits from Pu Yao's hands, that was an action leading to death. Mo found his own little life very precious. Pu Yao didn't seem to care if he was practicing embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Every day, he guarded his new sound tablet, endlessly amused. Every time he saw the brand new sound tablet that was higher in quality than the one in his hands, he would feel pain. 10 pieces of second-grade Jingshi was wasted. His teeth hurt. His heart sour, he could only hold in the tears as he took the sound tablet that Pu Yao was preparing to throw away. That was his old sound tablet that Pu Yao had taken from his hands. Enamored with the new, bored with the old. This was another bad habit that he found on Pu Yao's body. But coming back to it, did Pu Yao have any good habits? Embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation was like a small detour in his life, and Pu Yao seemed to have put away his perverseness, silent as a virgin. It made Mo feel unaccustomed. But malicious curses like Ren Yao is just Ren Yao, do you think if you don't speak, you can turn into a woman, naturally weren't avoidable. What made him happy was that he sped through the 5 element spells. He didn't know if it was because he completed the one breath. Many of the fuzzy part previously were abnormally clear now, easily realized. He became even more motivated. He didn't have any interest in something as strange as embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. The kind of things like art of aged gold, which could get him real things like Jingshi, and spells were his true love. He was like a monk, living an extremely dull life each day. Cultivating 10 principle scripture, accumulating ling energy, again and again, practicing all kind of spells, finger motions. Just like when he had practiced little art of cloud and rain, he furiously cultivated. The one that had the most improvement was art of aged gold. Presently, the aged gold energy was dark gold, the light subdued, changing according to his wishes. And compared to before, there was now an addition of a hint of imposingness. Even though it was extremely faint, but in actual use, the effects multiplied and made Mo gleeful. It wasn't strange that art of aged gold improved, since the most important aspect of art of aged gold was consciousness. Even though he had just finished one breath in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, but compared to before, his consciousness was much stronger. So it was expected that art of aged gold would improve. What made him surprised was that art of earth energy also improved much. The crucial factor in art of earth energy was communication and perception. Did his consciousness help with communication and perception? He didn't know, but since it was a good thing, he went with the flow and didn't examine it deeper. Zhuemo was in the yard as he practiced, Art of Aged Gold, when suddenly a calm and authoritative voice echoed through Wukong Mountain. Outer sect disciple Li Yingfeng continuously practiced and broke through to Zhuji. From today, she is formally taken into this sect's inner disciples. Outer sect disciples should take this as an example, cultivate relentlessly in order to reach the right result. This voice wasn't loud but clear. It rippled through Wukong Mountain and reverberated endlessly. Li Yingfeng managed to successfully Zhuji. Zhuemo couldn't help but admire and feel happy for Li Yingfeng Shiji. He hadn't interacted for a long time with Li Yingfeng Shiji, the two of them even had a misunderstanding, but he admired this brisk and clever Shiji. This was the role model a Shiji should be. In comparison, Hao Min Shiji was greatly lacking. His life wasn't affected by the news. His interest in Zhuji was much smaller than to become a ling plant farmer. Zhuji was the first great step to cultivation, but other than achieving Jindan, there wasn't much of a difference in lifespan compared to a normal person. As to Jindan, don't even think about it, not just an outer sect disciple like him, even among those inner SEC disciples, how many would achieve Jindan? And if he became a ling plant farmer, that was true and real Jingshi. He continued to bury himself in practicing his spells. To something he decided on, he never was remiss. Just like practicing, little art of cloud and rain, without anyone to teach him, he cast it again and again. He didn't know how many thousands of times he cast it, but he managed to fill up the large pond in the yard using little art of cloud and rain. Just like that, he managed to achieve the third level of little art of cloud and rain. His cultivation was interrupted by an uninvited guest. The one who came was the one who just became an inner sect disciple, Li Yingfeng Shiji. Congratulations, Shiji, for successfully Zhuji. Zhuemo smiled as he congratulated, but his expressionless features made it weird. Shidi is too polite. Li Yingfeng's face was full of joy as she responded, it won't be long before I would probably hear Shidi's good news. In Li Yingfeng's heart, this Shidi that kept himself concealed in the dark, it wouldn't be unexpected to her if he completed Zhuji. Behind her, there were 3 other female disciples, Xiaoguo among them. Zhuemo hurriedly said, it's still early, still early. Shiji, please. Xiaoguo's adorable and tender apple face was still timid. Zhuemo suddenly felt this little girl was really bashful. Taking advantage of when Li Yingfeng turned, he blinked his eyes at Xiaoguo. As expected, Xiaoguo's face flushed red. After everyone was seated, Li Yingfeng declared her intentions, coming this time, it's to ask for a favor from Shidi. Zhuemo was surprised. Seeming to have detected Zhuemo's puzzlement, before he could ask, Li Yingfeng herself answered the question, lightly sighing, entering the inner sect, in the future, I'm afraid I won't have the time again to care for these sisters. Shidi's growing skills, no one in the sect can compete, Shiji can only come with a thick face to beg. Zhuemo hurriedly deflected, Shiji, please tell. In the future, Li Yingfeng was an inner sect disciple. As long as Zhuemo would still stay in Wukong's sect for one more day, he wouldn't offend them. Li Yingfeng took out a small bag, putting it on the stone table, informing, this is 20 pieces of second-grade Jingshi. It's a little bit of regard from Shiji. Shidi, don't decline. Shidi, if you are free, spend some time at the Eastern Peak and attend a bit. Their lives aren't easy. If something like last time occurred, with Shidi's help, they wouldn't have no one to ask for aid. Beside her, Xiaoguo's mouth twisted and the rims of her eyes instantly turned red, the other 2 also had red eyes. Zhuemo sighed inside. Compared to Wei Xing Xixiang, the eldest Xixiang who only had cultivation, Li Yingfeng, as the eldest Shiji, was undoubtedly more competent. Only now did he understand why her reputation among the female disciples was so high. Thinking, Zhuemo pushed the bag back in front of Li Yingfeng, declaring, helping each other, it is a part of friendship. Shiji, don't worry, Shidi will do his best. Xiaogua stared with wide eyes at Suemo. The other two females also had strange expressions on their faces. They couldn't understand why this money-grubbing zombie changed his personality this time. Li Yingfeng shook her head and pushed the Jingshi again in front of Suemo. Shitty, don't decline. The sect has provisions for the inner sect disciples each month. Shijie doesn't lack for Jingshi. But Shitty, you aren't far from Zhuji, so you would most likely need it soon. Having some Jingshi, it's just in case. The strange expression on the three females' faces turned to shock. Zhuji. This ill-tempered zombie Shixiang was going to Zhuji soon. To be called nearing Zhuji, at the very least, it had to be 8th level of Lianqi and above. They were frightened out of their wits by Shiji's words. A cultivation of Lianqi 8th level in the outer sect disciples could be counted on one hand. Even Guolu Shixiang was just at Lianqi 7th level. And among the female disciples of the outer sect, other than Li Yingfeng who just entered Zhuji, the highest person was just Lianqi 6th level. In the outer sect disciples, other than Wei Sheng, Suomo's cultivation was the highest. This zombie face, he was actually the second best in the outer sect disciples. This was something they would have never thought about. Originally planning to grant a boon to Shiji, Suemo saw the situation and didn't stand on courtesy, and accepted the Jingshi, then many thanks, Shiji. It should be me that gives thanks to Shitty. Li Yingfeng smiled and informed, after I leave the eastern peak, Xiaoguo will be responsible for communicating with Shitty. Her personality is soft and obedient. Shitty, don't bully her. Suemo couldn't help laugh. What is Shiji talking about? My temper is the best. That's good. Li Yingfeng nodded. On the side, Xiaoguo wrinkled her adorable nose, clearly disagreeing with the words. She turned to show a dark face and said to the three people, in the future, if you have any questions, find Suemo Shixiang, he'll help you solve them. Suemo Shixiang's words are my words. If someone doesn't listen, I will personally punish. Yes. Shiji. The three females replied. As expected from the eldest Shiji. Just this bearing, no disciples in the younger generation could compete. Suemo couldn't help but compliment inside. After chatting for a while, Li Yingfeng left with the three other females. Suemo suddenly didn't have any interest in cultivation. This was a society with strict classes. Like Li Yingfeng Shiji, after successfully Zhuji, she had to bid farewell to the life of an outer sect disciple. She had to aim for even higher goals, no matter if it was her own goal or the needs of the sect. The lifespan of a Jindan was about 300 years. Before that, Zhuji, Ningmai, and Lianqi didn't have any differences in lifespan. His own sect was temporarily deficient in manpower and had been for a long time. Including the leader of the sect, the Shishu were all Jindan. This was the basic reason that Wukong's sword sect had expanded so well these past years. However, even the youngest Shishu, Shifeng Rong, was more than 200 years old. And among the disciples of the second generation, there wasn't even a Ningmai disciple, much less a Jingdan. If there wasn't a successor, Wukong's sect, not a very big sect to begin with, would quickly decline. No matter which Jie, a sect, once it declined, it was harder to rise again than to reach the heavens. Why did he suddenly become so melancholic? Suemo shook his head. Suddenly, he thought of the third-grade fire dragon grass that Wei Xing Shixiang gave into his care. Li Yingfeng Shiji had already entered Zhuji, Wei Xing Shixiang must be close as well. Thinking about it, the desire to go to Cold Mist Valley formed. Chapter 22 Silver-Horned Worm. It wasn't the first time he came to Cold Mist Valley, but he didn't know if it was the fact that his consciousness had improved, but the Jinji that he could only just feel the pressure of last time, were now like a beast that revealed the tip of its horn. That heavy power was multiple times stronger, making him feel unable to breath. Suemo walked with a trembling heart and rushed through the thick mists. The suddenly open valley was drifting with the fragrance from the herbs. Suemo unconsciously looked with trepidation at the roaring cold pond. Even though he successfully completed one breath, the feeling of oncoming death was in front of his eyes. He definitely didn't want to try again. He should be realistic and become a ling plant farmer, he told himself. Walking in front of the fire dragon grass, he was instantly shocked. The fire dragon grass was drooping, a hint of death coming from the red leaves. His heart instantly panicked. This fire dragon grass was intimately related to the big event of Wei Xing Xixiang entering Zhuji. If something went wrong, what would happen? He was extremely admiring of Wei Xing Xixiang, and truly hoped for Wei Xing Xixiang to successfully Zhuji. He hurriedly bent down to inspect this fire dragon grass. The soil in the surroundings was still moist, it wasn't a problem of underwatering, then what was the problem? His knowledge of ling herbs was pitiful, not to mention for a third-grade fire dragon grass. He ran through his brain, furiously going through his experiences of growing plants in these 2 years and at what time the symptoms were similar to what the fire dragon grass was experiencing now. Was it that there was a pest? He was uncertain, but he still put his hand on the fire dragon grass. In any case, art of aged gold wouldn't harm the ling herb, so it wouldn't hurt to try. The dark gold grains of sand enter the inside of the fire dragon grass from Zuomo's fingers. His consciousness carried with the aged gold energy entered the interior of the grass as well. The interior of each ling grass was a different world. The inside of ling grains was green. And the interior of the fire dragon grass was completely bright red. Before he could examine clearly, a dark and icy presence locked onto his consciousness. Contrary to expectations, Zuomo's heart calmed. What he was most afraid of was not knowing what was happening. Now that he knew where the problem was, it was much easier. In any case, GE has the aged gold energy, specializing in killing all kinds of pests. A crowd of silver-colored armored worms slowly climbed around the interior of the fire dragon grass. Their presence wasn't very strong, not as vicious as the aphids he met the first time. Suemo felt slightly relieved. His abilities with Art of Aged Gold were limited. If it was some strong worms, it wasn't that he would have no solution, he would also be in danger. He pushed the aged gold energy, sweeping towards the crowd of silver-armored worms. The silver-armed worms weren't panicked. They only kept on chewing the plant material in front of them. The aged gold energy was like a gold cloud, quickly surrounding these silver-armored worms. Zuomo's heart settled. He believed he would quickly finish the battle. The aged gold energy was much stronger than before, and he was full of confidence. After 10 minutes, sweat appeared on Zuomo's forehead. He had encountered trouble. No matter how much power he put into the aged gold energy, it was all useless against these silver-armored worms that were indifferent. He could clearly feel the ever-successful aged gold energy be blocked off, unable to move an inch. The aged gold energy, as sharp as steel sand, couldn't even leave a single mark on the surface of these silver-armored worms. Such hard shells. Third grade was really third grade, even the pests it had were stronger. Suemo wanted to cry. Art of Aged Gold was his only method of dealing with pests. And the other person in the sect whose Art of Aged Gold was at the second level, Guolu Shixiang, was still lying on the sickbed. What should he do now? The sweat poured down even more, his heart becoming panicked. Wei Xing Xixiang was depending on this to Zhuji, please don't let anything happen in his hands. Just when Zuomo had no ideas, Pu Yao suddenly appeared, Tisk, TSK. Can't even deal with a little silver-horned worm. You actually want to become a ling plant farmer? Zuomo suspiciously looked at Pu Yao, you have a way. Not waiting for Pu Yao to speak, he rolled his eyes, even if you have a solution, I wouldn't ask you. The painful experiences of the past told him to never to even think of trying to take advantage of Pu Yao. It would be a cruel death. But inside, he silently noted down the name, silver-horned worm. He thought he would go research at some other time to see if he could find silver-horned worm. Pu Yao wasn't angry, a faint curve to his mouth, his crimson right eye slightly narrowed. He, the way you are now, it really makes one feel hurt. Oh, that what's his name Shixiang of yours, the jade stick he gave you, isn't there some basic sword moves there? You could try to use sword moves with your aged gold energy. That works? Sui Mo was puzzled. You could try and find out. Pu Yao left behind before disappearing. Pu Yao was very strange today. Very strange. Even though he hadn't interacted with Pu Yao for a long time, couldn't see how deep he went, but Sui Mo was very clear that this guy wasn't someone good. And suddenly becoming kind today, it wasn't normal, definitely not normal. However, the only thing he could pick out was the abnormality. As to why he was strange, he couldn't find a reason no matter he spent a long time pondering it. This question was quickly thrown to the side. What was most important at this time was solving these silver-horned worms. Pu Yao's words, he was half convinced. The sword moves recorded in the jade stick that Wei Xing Shixiang gave him were some of the most basic moves. There wasn't anything deep in them. Even someone like Sui Mo who had never practiced the sword before could easily understand. To use sword scripture with aged gold energy. He sat on the ground, sinking into his thoughts. A beat later, he suddenly jumped up, the dark aged gold energy appearing at his fingertip. The aged gold energy was a cloud that seemed to be composed of gold sand, slowly revolving, extremely pretty. The aged gold energy suddenly restlessly turned, rapidly shrinking. Seconds later, it formed into a dark small sword the size of a grain. Calling it a small sword was really an overstatement. It was like a thin gold flake that had been flattened from a gold grain. But Sui Mo didn't care. He had only ever seen just a few flying swords in total. In this area, his imagination was nothing to write home about. He gestured each movement according to the moves in the jade stick. Very quickly, he found the benefits to his consciousness becoming stronger. He could easily manipulate the tiny sword. It was really just a few moves. He quickly familiarized himself. Entering the inside of the fire dragon grass again, the silver-horned worms were still unconcernedly chewing on the inside material of the fire dragon grass. Sui Mo didn't send a greeting and directly sent the sword over. Ding! The indifferent silver worm shook, sparks flying on the silver armor. Effective. Sui Mo was very happy. One blow after the next, according to the sword moves in Wei Xing Shixiang's jade stick, Sui Mo's hand wasn't lenient. Ding 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 ding. The shell of the silver-horned worm was incomparably hard. The sparks flew but there still weren't any cracks. But to Sui Mo, the silver-horned worms were the best targets. No matter how hard, it was still a target that wouldn't fight back. Sui Mo forgot himself. The rawness and unfamiliarity of sword moves slowly became familiar. The strength of the little aged gold swords gradually started to show itself. Ding! The sound was majorly different than before. On the armor of the silver-horned worm, a crack had been chopped out. Sui Mo had originally started to become tired. Using the sword moves to manipulate the aged gold little sword, it used up more Ling energy than using aged gold energy. And, it required much more from his spirit. If he hadn't achieved one breath in embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, before, his spiritual power wasn't enough to do this. Finally breaking through the silver-horned worm's defenses, Sui Mo became motivated and sent out a flurry of blows. Ding ding ding. The silver-horned worm finally couldn't endure it and with a crack, suddenly exploded. Fighting with me, serves you right. Sui Mo stared with disdain at the corpse of the silver-horned worm. However, his spirit became unstable and he hurriedly came out of the fire dragon grass. He had used up a lot of his Ling energy and consciousness. He hurriedly sat cross-legged to recover his Ling energy. His Ling energy recovered very quickly, but the usage of his consciousness hadn't recovered. To recover his consciousness, the only thing he could think of, the only way, that was, embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation. Was this Pu Yao's aim? He couldn't help but hesitate. When his gaze landed on the fire dragon grass, he struggled for a second but still decided to first exterminate these silver-horned worms. This was the first time he practiced embryonic breathing spiritual cultivation, after achieving the first breath. It seemed that as soon as he sat down, the breath was circulating in his body. A feeling of numbness that he never felt before seemed to spread from inside his bones. His entire person felt like it was flying. His mind was calm, as though it was a void. That was when he found that at some unknown time, in the sky of his sea of consciousness, there was an addition of one star. The star wasn't very bright, it was actually really dark. The flickering bright fire took away its light. Normally, he wouldn't have even noticed it. An illusion? Suemo wasn't certain. The addition of a star, his sea of consciousness becoming a sea of fire. All these changes, they didn't bring many changes to him. Waking up from his mediation, Suemo's mind was refreshed. He made an inspection. His spirit seemed to be just a sliver stronger. He was both joyed and worried. It was a good matter for his spirit to be stronger, but the lesson of last time when he reached one breath was right in front of his eyes. After destroying these silver-horned worms, he definitely wouldn't practice it anymore. He told himself inside. That extremely comfortable feeling just now made him automatically intoxicated and he was deeply alert. The most beautiful didn't have to be fish soup, it could be poison. Pu Yao's abnormality made him feel that the chance it would be poison was extremely large. Gradually becoming fluent, Suemo's efficiency increased greatly, the sword moves became even more penetrating. The silver-horned worms that he could do nothing about previously, in just a few strokes, they were taken down. Suemo felt exhilarated but he was extremely rational and didn't practice anymore. The fire dragon grass, rid of the silver-horned worms, instantly sent out exuberant vitality. Suemo had found a pattern. If he killed the natural predators inside the plants, the corpses of these natural predators would become the best fertilizers. In the next few days, he guarded the fire dragon grass, fearful of another accident. This day, like normal, he came to Cold Mist Valley. What was this? His gaze was on the fire dragon grass. A rice-sized red fruit. Before, this fruit had been green but now it was red. But with his pitiful amount of Ling herb knowledge, he couldn't distinguish if this small fruit was really a fruit or a seed. However, no matter if it was a fruit or a seed, it still meant that the growth of this fire dragon plant was very good, it was a good event. What he had been most worried about was that this fire dragon plant would be unaccustomed to the soil, or if the grade would drop. Then he wouldn't have the face to see Wei Xingxixiang. In the next few days, he carefully guarded the fire dragon grass. Fire dragon grass was a classical yang-oriented grass, appropriate for art of crimson flame. Each day, Suemo didn't forget to cast it a few times. The leaves became even more red and bright, and that rice-sized fruit was now about the size of a soybean, the color steadily darkening. Everything was good for Wei Xingxixiang to come to the door. Chapter 23 Apparitions. Wei Mo looked in shock at Wei Xingxixiang. The clothing on Wei Xingxixiang's body was ripped to shreds, his entire person an unsheathed sword, exuding a heavy presence. This felt strange to Suemo. Suddenly the term appeared in his mind, sword essence. Suemo suddenly realized, congratulations Xixiang. Hearing this, Wei Xing smiled. The sword essence surrounding his body seemed to have been pushed by an invisible hand, suddenly vibrating. The small pebbles on the ground were all thrown up in the air, dust rising. In just a few seconds, the ground underneath his feet was cut into a shallow hole by the invisible sword essence. My apologies, Shitty. My cultivation is limited and cannot control it. Shixiang needs the fire dragon grass. Zuo waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind. This was the first time he saw someone preparing to zhuji and he was extremely curious. Thanks for the trouble, Shitty. Wei Xing helplessly moved his feet. The dirt hole under his feet was almost up to his knees. Understanding that Wei Xing was at a crucial time, Zuo didn't waste words. Shixiang, please come with me. Finishing, he started to sprint in the direction of Cold Mist Valley. Behind him came the continuous sound of cracking. Anywhere that Wei Xing Shixiang passed, there were crisscrosses of fine cuts on the ground, little pebbles sent flying away. The two very quickly ran to Cold Mist Valley. Zuo threw out, Shixiang, please wait a moment. He then entered the mist and in a short while came back out holding the bright red fire dragon grass. He carefully put the grass on the ground and then quickly jumped to one side. The fine and scattered sword essences creating a shroud around Shixiang were extremely damaging. His heart had trembled on the way here. Wei Xing bent down to grab the fire dragon grass. He saw the fire dragon grass was like a ball of fire, the color even brighter than before. Joy appeared on Wei Xing's face. His expression solemn, he bowed to Zuo, many thanks Shitty. Finishing, Wei Xing Shixiang quickly left. Zuo stared dazedly at Wei Xing Shixiang's back. This was the first time he saw a person state right before they were going to zhuji. It was completely different from what he had imagined. So when Liang Feng Shiji was entering zhuji, was it something like this as well? Zhuji, it was called the first barrier for Xiuzhi. As expected, it really was extraordinary. His mind was slightly distracted all day. The scene of Wei Xing's sword essence flying around gave him a tremendous shock. And he still hadn't heard the voice that had announced last time when Liang Feng Shiji had successfully zhuji. Would it have failed? His heart was full of worry. On its own, fire dragon grass was like a violent poison. Just the slightest misstep and the Ling energy would collapse. Even more, what Wei Xing Shixiang had taken was a third-grade fire dragon grass. He had only met Wei Xing Shixiang twice but this steel-hearted, indomitable Shixiang made him admire. Before this, he had always felt that he was a very hard-working person, but compared to Shixiang, he wasn't even worth a mention. At midnight, Zuo sat on the roof, absent-mindedly listening to the sound of the sound tablet's broadcast, the worry inside even greater. Just at this time, an extremely blinding light suddenly ascended from a certain location in the mountain, thrusting up at the sky. Clang! Like a treasure sword being unsheathed, iron and stone striking, resonating in Wukong Mountains. With such a large commotion, the other disciples were all startled awake, each one running out, their faces full of awe as they looked at the sword-like light that seemed to have pierced the heavens. On the rooftop, Zuo's expression was also dumbstruck. Inside, he was both happy and surprised. Happy because this presence was Wei Xing Shixiang. What made him surprised was that this sword-like light gave him tremendous pressure. He couldn't help but think of the snow-white sword essence that had wounded his sea of consciousness. The two were extremely alike, but while this one wasn't as vast and icy as the snow-white sword essence, Shixiang's sword essence had an honest and concentrated flavor. Zuo's understanding of the sword was pitiful, but in that instant, he was certain that it was Shixiang's sword essence. He dazedly stared at this sword tip that was thrusting into the clouds, both happy and envious. There wasn't much of a sound when Liang Feng Shiji had zhuji. The fact that Shixiang's zhuji had influenced the sky, he was really awesome. Such an apparition, not just Wukong Mountain was alerted, but the sects in the surroundings were all alarmed. He could see countless swords flying like meteors over. No one noticed that at some unknown time, the sect leader and the other Shishu were already waiting in the sky. Our sect will rise. The third Shishu Yan Li's voice was slightly trembling. There wasn't a hint of the smile that was usually hanging on his face. Just the reverse, there were tears. The sect leader Pei Yuan ran also couldn't bear it. Right there in the sky, he suddenly knelt down, facing the east, his voice choked as he kowtowed 3 times, "This unworthy disciple thanks our sect's ancestors for your protection. Protecting our sect's passage to continue." Raising his head, tears streamed down his face. Yen Lu and Xian Yen also knelt down, kowtowing 3 times towards the east. The 3 stood, each of them smiling from ear to ear, like they were drunk. Even Xian Yen, the one most stern usually, had a slight blush on his face. Such a pity 4th Shimmy is still traveling and hasn't returned. Otherwise, if she saw this scene, it's unknown how gratified she would be. Pei Yuan Rant's expression recovered as he sighed ruefully. Yen Lei felt the same. To be able to see this, I have no regrets left in this life. Pei Yuan Ran berated, "Shitty, don't speak nonsense. Our sect is going to rise. We need to put in all our effort and nurture Wei Sheng, so that we will not disappoint the expectations our previous teachers have." Yen Lu nodded, "Shixiang is right." He suddenly turned his face, brows furrowing and said, slightly displeased, "There's a lot of guests today." A cold light flashed through Pei Yuanyan's eyes, his voice calm as he ordered, "But tonight isn't the time to receive them. Second Shitty, do not let them disturb Wei Sheng." "Yes." Xian Yen, who had calmed down, was as stern and grave as iron and stone. Just the one word was full of ice. No matter if it was the Xiuzha that were flying towards Wukong Mountains or the outer sect disciples raising their heads to look, they all felt a snow-white light flash across their eyes. Before they could react, a terrifying sword essence, vast and filled with an apocalyptic presence, spread over their heads. Everyone stilled in shock, uncontrollably retreating. A gigantic snow-white dragon, taking over half of the sky, moved its nimble body as it flew in the night sky. That pair of eyes like ice crystals were full of arrogance. From very far away, a cold and fierce presence could be felt. Only at this time did the people remember, Wukong Mountains had 4 Xiuzha that were Jin Dan. "Is it, Ice Dragon Sword?" An ancient-sounding voice came from far away. Xian Yen raised his eyelids, desire for battle flickering through his eyes, as he responded frigidly, "This one is Xian Yen." On Wukong Mountains, all the outer sect disciples, with raised faces, sighed in shock. Xian Yen Shishu, who usually had a stone face, actually had such a big reputation. The person from far away didn't speak. It is too late today, and coincidentally, it is the time that this young disciple is Juji. We really cannot receive everyone and have to disturb you. Please forgive us. Why don't everyone find another day to come? This sect will prepare for your arrival. Pei Yuanyan's authoritative voice could be heard near and far. Didn't think my Dong Fu would have someone as skilled as Ice Dragon Sword. Sorry for the discourtesy. Wukong Sword Sect will soon prosper. This poor cultivator Tian Song Zi first congratulates you. Today is inconvenient, then I will disturb at some other day. The voice echoed until it couldn't be heard any longer. The cultivators in the surroundings were greatly surprised. They hadn't thought the person who came was Tian Song Zi. Tian Song Zi was renowned in the entire Dong Fu. He was the descendant of Dong Fu Xianren, and the true ruler of Dong Fu. Even Pei Yuan Ra was surprised. He hadn't thought that the disturbance here would startle Tian Song Zi. Tian Song Zi's reputation was extremely high in Dong Fu, his rumored cultivation was also astounding. But he truly was a leader of a sect. He held his composure and shouted, "Take care, elder." The Xiuzha that had wanted to explore saw the situation and tactfully scattered away. Someone that even Tian Song Zi would treat respectfully, they wouldn't dare be rash. Smart people recognized that Wukong Sword Sect's position would rise in Dong Fu. Most of them knew that Wukong Sword Sect had 4 Jindan Xiuzha. However, normally Wukong Mountain rarely conversed with outsiders. The 4, other than Yen Lu who was mainly in charge of the operations, the other three basically didn't step outside the doors to the mountain. Intelligent people decided to go find out more about Ice Dragon Sword. Such a strong person, yet silently living in a little mountain, it was really puzzling. Zhuemo didn't hear a word of the conversation between the sect leader and Tian Songzi. He stared, dumbstruck, at the snow-white dragon that was swimming in the night sky. Just like he could conclude that the sword energy that was piercing the sky was due to Wei Xingxixiang, he recognized that snow-white dragon that was twisting in the sky. It was that sword essence that was in his sea of consciousness. On the outside appearance, the two were greatly different, but for some reason, he was abnormally certain that this dragon and the white sword essence that he had only seen 2 times weren't inherently different. He blanked. So that night, it had been Shishu. This conclusion made his heart leap. He suddenly remembered the main culprit was still in his consciousness. This thought instantly made his heart madly shake. If the sect leader and the others knew that Pu was in his consciousness. He couldn't help but shudder, his teeth chattering. He looked again at the snow dragon in the sky, coldness creeping up his heart. He always had the feeling that this snow dragon could discover Pu Yao at any time and then would unhesitatingly swoop down and tear him to pieces. This feeling became stronger and stronger. He even felt that the gigantic dragon was always staring at him. His soul leaping, he couldn't do anything except frantically escaping down the rooftop and shrinking back into his rooms. When he returned to the seclusion room, he finally recovered. After a few seconds, his heartbeat calming, his tongue was dry. The damned Pu Yao. Zhuemo couldn't help but curse again inside. He suddenly remembered that Pu Yao could come out on his own. This thought made him instantly panicked. Pu Yao, that crazy maniac, don't create a disturbance now. He quickly sat, forcing his heart to calm and entered his consciousness. His sea of consciousness seemed to have a violent wind blowing, the dark red flames furiously dancing, like a crowd of beautiful Naga twisting their heart-stopping waists. Pu wasn't sitting on the gravestone like he normally did, but was standing in front of the gravestone like a spear. The smooth satin-like black clothing flapping in the wind, the black hair flying in front of his forehead but still covering his left eye. His blood-red right eye was deep as he gazed at the gravestone. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.